Imagine silence. Not the silence that falls over a sleeping city, threaded with the distant hum of traffic and the whisper of the wind. Not the silence of an anechoic chamber, where you begin to hear the beat of your own heart and the rush of blood in your veins. Imagine an absolute, all-encompassing cosmic silence. The great silence. Billions of stars, billions of galaxies, unimaginable distances and times stretched to an eternity. And in the midst of all this grandeur, us. A civilization that only a few decades ago learned how to listen to this silence, aiming its fragile technological ears into the abyss. We've been listening for almost a century. We've sent our own signals, built giant radio telescopes, and written complex algorithms to sift through the cosmic static, hoping to hear something. Anything. A single whisper that would prove we are not alone. But the answer has been silence. The Fermi paradox, named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, poses a simple and terrifying question. If the universe is so vast and old, why do we see no signs of other civilizations? Where is everybody? This silence has become a fundamental constant of our worldview. It is the backdrop against which the entire drama of human existence unfolds. We've grown accustomed to it. We've almost made our peace with it. But what if we've been listening incorrectly all this time? What if the silence is not an absence of sound, but the result of our inability to distinguish the signal from the noise? And what if, one day, this silence is broken, not by a loud shout, but by a perfect, almost unnatural whisper that forces us to question everything we thought we knew about the universe and our place in it? This is the story of such a whisper. The story of a signal that was too perfect to be true, and of two events occurring almost simultaneously that at first glance had nothing to do with each other. At first glance. The official version states that it was a simple coincidence, a series of random, unrelated phenomena. But in our investigation, we will adhere to a different principle. In the architecture of the cosmos, there are no random coincidences. There is only choreography, on a scale we are not yet capable of comprehending. And it all began on October 27th, 2025. On that day, the astronomical community erupted in excitement. The news spread through internal channels and secure chat rooms with lightning speed, long before it reached the global media. A team of radio astronomers working at the VLA telescope array in the New Mexico desert announced the confirmation of a new, unique, fast radio burst, or FRB. To understand the significance of this event, you need to understand the context. Fast radio bursts are one of the biggest mysteries in modern astrophysics. Imagine a flash of energy that lasts only a few thousandths of a second, shorter than the blink of an eye. But in those milliseconds, it releases as much energy as our sun radiates in several days, sometimes even months. These are colossal, unimaginable cataclysms happening billions of light years away. We only started noticing them in 2007, and since then, they have become a real headache for scientists. What could generate such monstrous bursts of energy? The hypotheses were numerous. Merging black holes, collapsing neutron stars, even exotic ideas about cosmic strings. The picture became a little clearer when we discovered that some of these bursts repeat. They came from the same point in space, sometimes chaotically, sometimes with a certain periodicity. This discovery helped narrow down the list of suspects. The main candidates for the source of repeating FRBs became magnetars, a special, extremely rare type of neutron star. A magnetar is a cosmic monster. It's the remnant of a supernova, the core of a massive star crushed by gravity to the size of a small city, but with a mass greater than our sun's. The density of matter there is such that a teaspoon of it would weigh billions of tons on Earth. But their main feature is their magnetic field. It is quadrillions of times more powerful than Earth's magnetic field. So powerful that it distorts the very fabric of space-time around it, and can tear any object that comes within hundreds of thousands of kilometers or miles to shreds. According to the theory, colossal stresses in the magnetar's crust cause starquakes, which in turn generate these incredible bursts of radio waves. This theory became widely accepted, convenient, and elegant. It explained almost everything. Almost. The new signal, catalogued as FRB 2024-1027, or as it was nicknamed behind closed doors, the Trickster event, was different. It was perfect. Too perfect. First, its periodicity wasn't just stable, it was mathematically flawless. The signal repeated every 16.35 Earth days with millisecond precision, as if someone had wound up a cosmic metronome. Second, each individual burst within the series was nearly identical to the previous one in shape and intensity. Nature doesn't work that way. Even the most stable processes in the universe, like the pulsation of pulsars, have microscopic fluctuations, a so-called jitter. The Trickster had virtually no jitter. The signal was clean, as if it had been passed through a digital filter. Third, its polarization was strange. Radio waves passing through interstellar plasma become polarized, meaning their oscillations begin to occur in a specific plane. This effect, called Faraday rotation, depends on the density of the plasma and the strength of the magnetic field along the signal's path. For the Trickster, this effect was abnormally high and yet unnaturally stable, requiring very specific and improbable conditions in its home galaxy, estimated to be 3 billion light-years away. The scientific community, however, was in a state of euphoria. The system worked flawlessly. "This is a textbook example of a magnetar in a unique environment," declared the official press release on the National Radio Astronomy Observatory website. "The signal's remarkable stability likely points to a special mechanism of interaction between the star's magnetic field and its surrounding plasma nebula. FRB 2024-1027 opens a new chapter in the study of these extreme objects. Scientists worldwide rush to write papers and build models explaining the signal's perfection with complex configurations of the interstellar medium. The anomalies were acknowledged, but they were neatly packaged within the existing paradigm. They became not a challenge, but merely interesting features to be studied in the future. The system had found a convenient explanation and settled down. The world celebrated a new great discovery, another small step in understanding the cosmos. Everything was logical, understandable, and safe. That was the first event. Now, imagine the second. It happened at almost the exact same time, during the very hours when astronomers across the globe were exchanging data confirming the Trickster's incredible stability. But this event didn't make the front pages. It was only discussed in the niche circles of system administrators, financial analysts, and cybersecurity engineers. It was a glitch. A global glitch, but one almost invisible to the average person. A glitch in the very heart of our digital civilization, the time synchronization system. Our planet is enmeshed in an invisible nervous system. A global network of servers, known as the Network Time Protocol, or NTP, continuously maintains the precise time on billions of devices, from your smartphone and laptop to ATMs, air traffic control systems, and stock market servers. This system relies on data from atomic clocks, the most accurate timekeepers ever created by humanity. Nanosecond accuracy is not a luxury, but a necessity for a world where financial transactions happen in microseconds, and satellite navigation depends on perfect synchronization. This infrastructure is incredibly robust, with multiple layers of redundancy, designed to withstand almost any failure. But on that day, October 27th, it failed. It all started with an anomaly in the Stratum 0 NTP servers, the ones directly connected to atomic clocks. For a period of 84 seconds, they began transmitting slightly desynchronized timestamps, The discrepancy was minuscule, just a few hundred microseconds. But in the world of high technology, that's an eternity. This dirty signal cascaded down the hierarchy to stratum 1, 2, and 3 servers. Automated systems around the world began to go haywire. Some rejected the incorrect data, as they were supposed to, but others, due to the specifics of their algorithms, accepted it, triggering a chain reaction. On Wall Street, high-frequency trading halted for several minutes, leading to millions of dollars in losses. GPS systems worldwide began reporting positioning errors of several dozen meters. Amazon and Google's cloud services reported massive outages in their North American and European data centers due to authentication issues tied to precise timestamps. To most people, it looked like a temporary internet slowdown or a glitch in their favorite app. But for those on the inside, it was a digital apocalypse in miniature. 3 hours after the incident began, everything returned to normal. The leading tech companies issued a joint statement. The cause of the disruption, it read, was a rare but theoretically possible cascading failure, triggered by an unforeseen resonance in the software of several key servers. The problem has been localized, and the vulnerability has been patched. No evidence of external interference was found. Just a technical glitch. Inconvenient, costly, but ultimately explainable and understandable. The world breathed a sigh of relief and forgot. That was the official version. Another convenient, simple, and safe story. 2 events. 1. In the depths of space, 3 billion light-years away. The discovery of a signal from a dead star, as regular as a clock. A triumph of science and order. The other, here on Earth. A fleeting fit of chaos in the digital heart of our civilization. An unpleasant but explainable technical failure. They happened on the same day, at the same time. And no one saw any connection. No one asked the main question. Coincidence or choreography? The system gave its answer. These events are absolutely and categorically unrelated. This answer was disseminated, accepted, and archived. But it is in such convenient categorical answers that the real truth hides. Because the numbers didn't add up. And the silence that followed these statements was too deafening to be natural. It wasn't just silence. It was the architecture of a cover-up. And our investigation is just beginning. To understand how a great lie collapses, you must first admire its beauty. The official version of the trickster event was just that. Beautiful, elegant. It transformed a chaotic and frightening set of anomalies into a coherent scientific poem. Imagine 3 billion light-years away, in a distant, nameless galaxy, a cosmic topspins. A magnetar. Its crust, made of super-dense matter, is under unimaginable stress from its own magnetic field. From time to time, this stress reaches a critical point, and a crack runs across the star's surface, causing a colossal starquake. This cataclysm releases a beam of radio waves of incredible power. This beam, by a stroke of luck, is aimed directly at Earth. But before it escapes into intergalactic space, it passes through a dense cloud of magnetized plasma surrounding the magnetar. This cloud, like a complex lens, gives the signal its unique properties. It stabilizes it, imparts its strange polarization, and shapes its perfect form. It was a story of a cosmic miracle, of the rarest confluence of circumstances that we were fortunate enough to witness. This version was not just an explanation, it was a reassurance. It told us, yes, this is strange. Yes, this is unique. But it is understandable. It fits within our models. We are still in control. The universe, though full of surprises, still obeys the laws we know. The scientific community clung to this story with relief. Conferences, symposiums, dozens of scientific papers based on this model began to appear in prestigious journals. The system worked like clockwork, digesting the anomaly and turning it into another brick in the edifice of our knowledge. But any building constructed on a false foundation is doomed. It only needs one crack, one single detail that doesn't fit the beautiful story. In the case of the trickster, there were 3 such cracks, and each one was deeper and more dangerous than the last. The first crack was the periodicity. The official version elegantly sidestepped this issue, calling it remarkably stable. But that word, stability, was a smokescreen hiding the real problem. Let's break down the mechanics. The starquake model on a magnetar is inherently chaotic. Imagine a geological fault line on Earth. We know that stress builds up in it. We know that sooner or later, an earthquake will occur. But we cannot predict it to the second, because the process of crustal failure is chaos. Multiple microfractures, random density fluctuations, unpredictable cascading effects. The same thing, but on an unimaginable scale, should be happening on a magnetar. Its crust should crack and break according to the laws of fractal geometry, not the schedule of a Japanese bullet train. There are models that attempt to explain the periodicity of repeating FRBs. For example, the rotation of the magnetar itself, which might have an active spot that periodically comes into our line of sight, or its motion in orbit around another object, like a black hole, where bursts occur at a specific point in the orbit. These models can explain general cyclicity, say, activity for a few days, followed by a period of silence. But they cannot explain what we saw with the trickster. Its period, 16.35 Earth days, was maintained with a precision that cannot be explained by any natural astrophysical processes. We are talking about stability comparable to the best atomic clocks on Earth. No rotation, no orbital motion can provide such accuracy over many cycles. There are always gravitational perturbations from nearby objects. There is always energy loss. There is always that jitter, the microscopic deviations that are the signature of any natural process. The trickster had no such signature. Its pulses arrived as if sent by a digital time synchronization protocol. This wasn't stability. It was artificiality. This was the first crack. A crack in the very foundation of the proposed mechanism. Nature does not create perfect metronomes. Intelligence creates perfect metronomes. The second crack was even deeper. It concerned the shape of the pulses themselves. The official version stated that the signal, after traveling 3 billion light-years through the interstellar and intergalactic medium, retained its original structure thanks to the unique properties of the nebula around the source. This statement sounds scientific, but it borders on the absurd. Imagine writing a letter on a piece of paper, putting it in a bottle, and throwing it into the ocean. And 3,000 years later, that bottle washes up on another continent. You take out the paper, and on it is the same letter, with the same clarity, the same ink, without a single smudge. Would you believe it? This is precisely what we were asked to accept on faith. The path of a radio signal from a distant galaxy to us is not empty space. It is a churning ocean of tenuous plasma, magnetic fields, and clouds of dust and gas. Each of these obstacles leaves its mark on the signal. It scatters it, distorts its shape, adds noise. An effect known as multipath propagation splits the signal into multiple copies that arrive with microscopic delays, blurring its original form. This effect is unavoidable. It is a fundamental property of wave propagation in a non-uniform medium. Each of the hundreds of trickster pulses we detected should have traveled a slightly different path. It should have encountered slightly different plasma fluctuations, crossed slightly different magnetic fields. Each pulse should have been unique, like a snowflake, distorted, noisy, but unique. But when astronomers overlaid the graphs of several dozen bursts on top of each other, they saw the impossible. They matched perfectly, pixel for pixel. All the finest details of the structure, micro peaks, slopes, plateaus, repeated with absolute fidelity. The signal was so clean, it was as if it hadn't been born in the chaos of a starquake, but generated in a laboratory. As if it had traveled 3 billion light years not through a cosmic ocean, but through a perfect vacuum. No hypothetical magic nebula around the source could explain this, because 99.99% of the distortion a signal accumulates happens not at home, but on the journey. The long, 3 billion year journey to us. This perfect self-copy was the second crack. It suggested we were seeing something that violates the basic laws of information propagation in the universe. Either the laws are wrong, or we are not seeing what we think we are seeing. The third crack was the most dangerous. It threatened to bring the whole edifice down. It was the polarization. As we've said, radio waves passing through magnetized plasma experience Faraday rotation. The plane of their polarization rotates. The amount of this rotation depends on two things: the density of the plasma and the strength of the magnetic field along the line of sight. For the trickster, this effect was abnormally strong and yet incredibly stable. The official version explained this with that same hypothetical nebula around the magnetar, very dense and with a very strong uniform magnetic field. This in itself was a stretch. Such a combination is extremely unlikely. It's like finding a perfectly manicured English lawn in the middle of a wild forest. But that wasn't even the main problem. If such a nebula really existed, it wouldn't be invisible outside the radio spectrum. A dense, hot, magnetized plasma should literally shine in other parts of the spectrum. It should be a powerful source of X-ray radiation. It should glow in the infrared. This is elementary physics. And when the largest space telescopes, the Chandra X-ray Observatory and the James Webb Space Telescope, were pointed at the spot in the sky where the trickster came from, they saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was only emptiness. No nebula, no gas cloud, no glow. This was a devastating blow to the official version. The key element that explained all the signal's oddities, the magic nebula, simply did not exist. It was a ghost, a fiction, a scientific fabrication created to patch the holes in the theory. And at that moment, the story ceased to be a mere scientific error, because the data from Chandra and Webb was available. Any graduate student could go to the public archive, download it, and confirm that there was no nebula. But in the dozens of published papers on the trickster, there was not a single word about this. The fact of the nebula's absence was simply ignored. It was met with silence. And that is no longer an error. That is a choice. It is intellectual dishonesty. It is a cover-up. And this is where our investigation moves from the offices of theorists into the cold digital vaults where raw, unprocessed data is stored. Modern science promises us transparency. Anyone can access terabytes of information collected by humanity's greatest instruments. But this transparency is an illusion. It's like standing before an ocean and claiming to see every drop. The volumes of data are so vast that they are processed by automated algorithms, neural networks trained to search for specific, expected patterns. They look for what they're told to look for. Everything else they discard as noise or an artifact. But there are always people who don't trust algorithms. Digital prospectors, ghost hunters in the data. They gather on private forums, in encrypted chat rooms, and spend their nights manually sifting through this noise, looking for what the machine missed. And one such researcher, hiding under the moniker Cassandra, made a discovery that became the final straw, the blow that brought the whole structure crashing down. He decided to look not at the trickster signal itself, but at what was around it. The microseconds before its arrival and the microseconds after. The region that any standard algorithm considers background noise and cuts off. He downloaded the raw waveforms from the VLA servers and built a spectrogram, a visual representation of the radio signal with time on one axis, frequency on the other, and color showing intensity. And he saw it. Before each powerful, perfect burst from the trickster, appearing a few milliseconds ahead, a faint ghost emerged on the spectrogram, incredibly weak, drowned in noise, but with a clear, repeating structure. It was like an echo that arrives before the sound. A pre-echo. Mainstream science knows about such things. Usually it's an instrumental artifact caused by the telescope's electronics. But the artifacts of each telescope are well studied, their signatures known and catalogued. And this ghost was unlike any of them. It had its own strange dispersion measure. It had its own unique polarization. It behaved not like an instrument error, but like a separate real signal. Incredibly faint, but real. This ghostly signal was the killer of the official theory. It didn't fit in any way. No magnetar, no nebula could create such an effect. And the scariest part wasn't even that. The scariest part was that in the dozens of official publications, in hundreds of pages of analysis, there was not a single word about this ghost. It wasn't even mentioned as an unexplained artifact. It simply didn't exist. It was cut from the final data. It was placed in a blind spot. And this was no longer just the concealment of an inconvenient fact. This was an active, deliberate operation to scrub reality. They weren't just mistaken. They knew they were mistaken. And they intentionally hid the data that proved it. The question was no longer, what is generating this strange signal? The question was now, what did they see in this ghostly echo? What frightened them so much that they resorted to a direct cover-up of the truth from the entire world? The crack had become a chasm, and we were only just beginning to peer into its depths. The silence that follows an inconvenient question is always more deafening than the question itself. In our case, that question was the ghostly signal, the pre-echo, discovered by an anonymous researcher in the raw, unfiltered data. This discovery, posted on an obscure forum for SETI signal processing, didn't cause a storm in the global media. It didn't lead to emergency press conferences. Instead, it was met with a deafening, perfect, near-vacuum silence. And that silence was the most eloquent answer of all. It was an admission that the system knew. They had seen this ghost long before we did, and they did everything they could to ensure no one else ever would. Our investigation entered a new phase. We were no longer searching for an anomaly in space. We began hunting for its reflection in the digital world, for the ghost in the machine, for the very gap in the data that, like a black hole, absorbs the light of the official version, leaving only darkness and questions in its wake. To find this gap, we had to descend into the deepest, darkest basements of modern science, the public data archives. To the layman, the word archive conjures images of dusty shelves, yellowed folders, and the smell of old paper. But the digital archives of NASA, the European Space Agency, or the National Radio Astronomy Observatory are something else entirely. Imagine invisible cathedrals of fiber optics and silicon scattered across the globe. Giant server farms, humming like disturbed beehives, consuming megawatts of electricity to cool the brain of our civilization. In these digital mausoleums, petabytes of information are stored. Everything our mechanical senses sent into space have ever seen, heard, and measured. This is the collective memory of humanity, recorded in the language of ones and zeros. Here lie the raw images from Hubble, telemetry from the Voyagers, waveforms from radio telescopes, an ocean of unprocessed virgin truth. At least that's the official version. The idea of public archives was born from a noble impulse to democratize science, to make it possible for any student, any enthusiast from anywhere in the world to touch the great discoveries, to re-verify them, and perhaps even to find what the professionals missed. It was a gesture of absolute transparency, of absolute trust. But like any complex system, this transparency has its shadow sides, its filters, its protocols, its unwritten rules, and it is in these rules that the devil hides. The process of data entering a public archive is not a simple file copy. It is a multi-stage procedure, reminiscent of processing evidence at a crime scene. First comes the raw data, level 0. This is a pure, unprocessed stream of bits straight from the instrument. It is full of noise, artifacts, and equipment malfunctions. Then this stream goes through a processing conveyor, the so-called pipeline. Special algorithms calibrate it, remove instrumental interference, and correct for distortions caused by Earth's atmosphere or the spacecraft's movement. The result is level 1, 2, and then level 3, data, science-ready products. These are the beautiful, clean graphs, filtered images, and convenient tables. It is this cleaned data that most scientists see. It is on their basis that papers are written, theories are built, and grand announcements are made. The raw data, level 0, is also placed in the archive, but it lies in the furthest corners, like old newspapers in a basement. It is rarely accessed because working with it requires immense computing power and deep, specialized knowledge. The system doesn't forbid you from looking at the raw truth. It just makes the process so difficult and inconvenient that almost no one does. Our plan was simple and fiendishly complex at the same time. We, a community of independent seekers scattered around the world, decided to conduct a total audit of the data on the Trickster event. We divided all available observations among ourselves, not just from the VLA, but from other major observatories. Australia's ASCAP, China's FAST, Canada's CHIME. Our task was to compare two worlds, the world of raw, unprocessed level 0 data, where Cassandra found his ghost, and the world of beautiful, science-ready level 3 products quoted in official publications. We weren't looking for an anomaly in the signal. We were looking for traces of its removal. The work took weeks. It was grueling, monotonous labor. Hours of downloading giant files, writing scripts to unpack and analyze them, endless nights spent comparing spectrograms. And at first, we found nothing. The data looked consistent. But then we noticed something strange. In the VLA archive, in the observation set from October 27th, 2025, in the very session where the Trickster was first detected, something was wrong with the metadata. Metadata is a file's passport. It records everything: the exact start and end time of the observation, the frequencies used, the operator's name, the version of the software that processed the signal. And in the processing logs, in a file with the almost unpronounceable name, VLDAY 25.27 Trickster Calib log V2.1. TXT, we found a line that shouldn't have been there. It was a record of the application of a non-standard filter. The filter was called Transient Artifact Suppression Module 7B. The standard VLA processing protocols are well known and documented, and this module was not in them. It was something new, something applied manually or by special command. We started digging deeper. We searched for any mention of this module in technical documentation, in code repositories, in developer correspondence. Nothing. Complete silence. As if this tool had never existed. But it was applied. And its application, according to the timestamp, perfectly coincided with the milliseconds where the ghostly pre-signal should have been. This was the first lead. The first thread that, when pulled, began to unravel the whole tangle. The next step was obvious. We took the raw data and manually, step by step, reproduced the entire official processing pipeline, but without this mysterious filter. And when the final spectrograms appeared on our computer screens, we saw it. The ghost was there. Faint, barely discernible, but it was there. And then we enabled the filter. We didn't know its exact parameters. We had to guess them, but the logic of its name, Transient Artifact Suppression Module, suggested that it searches for and cuts out short, non-periodic signals that don't fit the main picture. And when we applied it, the ghost vanished. It was gone. In its place was only smooth, clean background noise. This was it, the smoking gun. Irrefutable proof that the data wasn't just ignored, it was deliberately altered. Someone, a person or an algorithm acting on someone's orders, had gone into the system and surgically removed an inconvenient fact from reality. And they did it in such a way that almost no one would notice. Just added one more step to a complex, convoluted processing procedure, giving it a harmless name: artifact suppression. Who would object to cleaning data of junk? But this wasn't junk. It was the most important part of the entire message. But why? Why go to such lengths to hide an incredibly faint, barely noticeable signal? What was in it that required an unprecedented intervention in the holy of holies of science? The primary data. The answer could only be one thing. This ghost carried information. Information so strange, so alien, or so dangerous that the system decided to place it under an information quarantine, to hide it from us for our own good. And this is where our investigation splits again. We return to the second event of that day, the global failure of the NTP time synchronization system. The official version said, cascading failure due to resonance in the software. A convenient, technocratic phrase that explains nothing. But what if it wasn't the cause, but the effect? What if that ghostly signal they tried so hard to erase wasn't just a radio wave? What if it carried some kind of digital component? A virus, an information bomb, that, upon being received and processed by the radio telescope systems, penetrated further into the global network. After all major observatories today are not isolated ivory towers. They are tightly integrated into the internet. They use the same time synchronization protocols, the same cloud storage as we do. This hypothesis seemed fantastic, but it perfectly explained both events at once. Imagine, a dual signal arrives from space. The first part, faint, almost invisible, but carrying some kind of malicious code or simply information capable of causing a failure in complex systems. It hits the primary receivers. The second part, powerful, bright, dumb, serves as a beacon, a diversion that captures all the scientists' attention. The system, realizing what has happened, that they have caught not just a signal, but something capable of interacting with their technology, panics. They do two things. First, they urgently isolate and heal the infected networks, causing the global disruption they blame on technical glitches. Second, they erase all traces of the root cause. They cut the information virus out of all public data, leaving us with only a beautiful, safe, but completely false picture of a perfect magnetar. The silence we observed was not accidental. It was not a conspiracy of silence. It was a containment protocol. A protocol that activates when a civilization encounters a threat it can neither understand nor explain. They were not hiding the truth from us. They were trying to protect our fragile digital reality from it. And this brings us to the last, most terrifying question. If they hid the data from ground-based telescopes, what else did they hide? During the very same days this drama unfolded, in deep space, far beyond the orbit of Mars, NASA's automated spacecraft Psyche was flying towards its target. Its mission, to study a unique metallic asteroid. But along the way, its instruments were, of course, active. Its cameras, its spectrometers, its magnetometers were looking into the void. According to the published communication schedule, between October 26th and 29th, 2025, the spacecraft was supposed to transmit another package of telemetry and scientific data to Earth. But this package never appeared in the public archives. The official explanation was, a minor malfunction in the antenna orientation system, data transmission postponed. Postponed indefinitely. Silence. The same deafening, perfect, engineered silence. What if Psyche, being in deep space, far from the distortions of Earth's atmosphere, saw something related to the trickster? Something that couldn't be dismissed as an artifact or noise. Something so clear and irrefutable that the only option was to declare that this data simply did not exist. The silence was not random. It was the answer. The answer to what the Psyche spacecraft saw during those 3 missing days. In every great investigation, there comes a moment when a figure emerges from the shadows, capable of changing everything. A figure not bound by the system's rules, not shackled by its protocols, and not afraid of its silent condemnation. It could be an insider who decides to break their vow of silence. It could be a retired analyst whose inquisitive mind gives them no peace. Or, as in our case, it could be a person who has spent their entire life looking at the sky differently from everyone else. The voice of an oracle, which sounded not from the halls of prestigious universities, but from a homemade observatory in the backyard of a house in the Arizona desert. And this voice brought with it proof. Unexpected, irrefutable, and absolutely shocking. To understand the value of this proof, you first need to understand who obtained it. His name was Stefan Burns, a former optical engineer who worked for a major defense contractor. A man who spent decades creating the eyes for military satellites, highly complex systems of lenses and mirrors capable of distinguishing a license plate on a car from an altitude of hundreds of kilometers or miles. At 50, he retired, tired of the world of secrecy and bureaucracy, and dedicated himself to his one true passion, astronomy. But he wasn't just an amateur who gazed at the beauty of nebulae. He was a hunter of anomalies. His engineering experience told him that mainstream science, with all its giant telescopes and multi-billion-dollar budgets, has one fundamental blind spot. It looks for what it expects to find. Its instruments and algorithms are tuned for known phenomena, galaxies, stars, planets. Anything that doesn't fit these templates, anything that moves too fast, shines with the wrong light, or has an unnatural shape, is filtered out as space debris, lens flare, or a sensor error. Stefan decided to look into this very blind spot. With his savings, he built a unique instrument. It wasn't just an observatory. It was a trap. A system of 3 wide-angle telescopes separated by several kilometers, operating in sync. Each telescope was equipped with an ultra-sensitive camera and a set of special polarizing filters, similar to those he once designed for the military. But the key wasn't the hardware. It was the software. Stefan wrote his own algorithm that, in real time, compared the images from all 3 cameras. Its task was simple: to look for objects that were visible in all 3 images simultaneously, but were not in any catalog of known asteroids, satellites, or space junk. Using 3 observation points allowed for the instant rejection of false positives: flares, meteors in the upper atmosphere, birds, airplanes, through triangulation. If an object was real and in space, it had to have a measurable parallax, a slight shift against the backdrop of distant stars, visible from different points. His system was designed to find a needle in a haystack, to hunt for ghosts. On the night of October 27th, 2025, during the very hours when the VLA radio telescopes were capturing the perfect pulses of the trickster, and NTP servers around the world were in agony, Stefan Burns's system triggered. The algorithm emitted a soft beep, signaling the detection of an uncatalogued transient object. An image appeared on 3 screens. Against a scattering of stars in the constellation Pegasus, in the very area of the sky from which, according to official data, nothing but faint radio noise was coming, his system saw something. It was not a bright flash. It was not the swift streak of a meteor. It was something else. For nearly 3 minutes, the cameras recorded 3 dim, barely perceptible points of light. They moved in sync, maintaining a perfect distance from each other, forming an almost perfect equilateral triangle. Their brightness was so low that any single telescope, even a professional one, would likely have written them off as sensor noise. But Stefan's system saw them from 3 different angles. The parallax was obvious. The calculations the algorithm performed in real time were unambiguous. The object was not in the atmosphere, and not in near-Earth orbit. It was far away, very far, somewhere in the main asteroid belt, hundreds of millions of kilometers from Earth. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was how these points of light behaved. They weren't just flying. They were flickering. But it wasn't the usual twinkling caused by atmospheric turbulence. It was a synchronous, rhythmic change in brightness. All 3 points simultaneously grew slightly brighter, then simultaneously dimmed. And this rhythm, it was painfully familiar. Intrigued, Stefan pulled up his system logs and compared the timestamps of the brightness peaks with the publicly available data on the arrival times of the trickster's pulses. They matched, to a fraction of a second. At the very moment the giant dishes of the VLA were detecting a powerful radio burst from the depths of space, 3 unknown objects in our own solar system were responding with a barely perceptible optical flash. Stefan Burns was an engineer, not a conspiracy theorist. He spent the next few weeks trying to find a rational explanation. He checked everything: the calibration of his cameras, the functioning of his algorithm, possible reflections from known satellites, atmospheric phenomena. Nothing. The phenomenon was real. 3 unknown objects flying in formation were pulsating in time with a distant radio signal. This was not just a correlation. It was a dialogue, or rather, a reaction. As if these objects lit up every time they were touched by an invisible beam. He realized he was holding something incredibly important, but he also understood that if he sent his data to official bodies, the Minor Planet Center or NASA, it would most likely be ignored. He would be called a crank, his data dismissed as an equipment error. The system doesn't like evidence that comes from outsiders, so he did what everyone who seeks the truth in an age of digital distrust does. He went where he would be heard. He uploaded all his data, raw images, logs, calculations, a detailed description of his methodology, to the same private forum where Cassandra first reported the ghostly pre-echo. For our decentralized community of seekers, this was like finding the Rosetta Stone. Stefan's data was the missing link that perfectly filled the gap left by the system. Remember, we had 2 huge questions. First, why was the trickster signal so clean and undistorted, as if it had traveled through a vacuum? And second, where did its anomalous polarization come from if there was no nebula around the source? Now we had a candidate for an answer. What if we're not receiving a direct signal? What if the real, dirty, chaotic signal from the distant magnetar never reaches Earth? What if, on its way, it encounters some object that acts as a mirror? Imagine cosmic billiards played on a planetary scale. The signal from the magnetar travels for 3 billion years. Just before it would have passed by Earth, it hits this triangle of 3 objects we know nothing about. These objects, perhaps, have a crystalline or artificial surface that perfectly reflects radio waves of a specific frequency. They act as a giant, perfectly tuned, phased array mirror. They receive the distorted, noisy signal and reflect a perfect, filtered, and polarized copy in our direction. And the faint optical flash that Stefan detected is simply a byproduct of this process. The conversion of some of the radio wave energy into visible light at the moment of reflection. This hypothesis, at first glance, seemed even more fantastic than the official version. But, like a master key, it unlocked all the locks at once. It explained the signal's perfect clarity. We are receiving not the signal that traveled 3 billion light years, but the one that traveled only a few 100 million kilometers from the mirror to us. The path is too short to accumulate distortions. It explained the perfect periodicity. Perhaps the mirror doesn't just passively reflect, but actively locks on to the signal, synchronizes with it, and re-emits it, removing the natural jitter, just as any digital repeater does. It explained the anomalous polarization. It is created not by a mythical nebula at the source, but by the process of reflection from the specific surface of these objects. All the anomalies that had physicists concocting ever more complex and incredible models vanished when just one element was added to the equation. Them. But most importantly, this hypothesis explained the system's behavior. It explained the cover-up. If they realized that the signal was an echo reflected from unknown objects in our own solar system, it changed everything. It meant that right next door, in our own backyard, there is something. Something technologically advanced. Something we have no idea about. And this something is using distant stars and our planet to conduct its own observations, its own triangulation. We thought we were listening to the universe. It turns out we were just eavesdropping on someone else listening to the same universe, using us as one of their sensors. This knowledge wasn't just inconvenient, it was existentially terrifying. This was the contact we had been waiting for and fearing. But it didn't happen like in the movies. There were no flying saucers over the White House, no messages of peace. There was only a quiet click in the radio waves and a barely perceptible flicker in the eyepiece of an amateur telescope, and the realization that we might not be the masters of our own house. Stefan Burns's discovery was a catalyst. Other amateur astronomers, armed with his ephemeris, the precise coordinates and motion vector, began to review their old, archived images, and they began to find them. A faint triangle of light on an image taken a year ago from Chile. A barely visible trace on a photograph from an observatory in Namibia, dated 3 years earlier. This was not an isolated incident. This was a signature that other observers began to find in old, archived data. The object had been there for a long time. It was flying on its own unknown complex orbit. And all this time, the system, with its all-seeing telescopes and asteroid tracking programs, didn't notice it, or pretended not to notice, because to acknowledge its existence was to acknowledge everything else. The oracle's voice had spoken, and now the system's silence was no longer just suspicious. It had become criminal. When a detective investigating a series of mysterious crimes accumulates enough clues, he stops filing them away. He goes to a blank wall, grabs a map of the city, pushpins, and red string. He begins to build a visual network, a conspiracy map where every event, every clue, every witness is a point, and the strings between them are the hidden connections, invisible to the uninitiated. At first, it's a chaos of information fragments, but gradually, as more points and strings appear on the map, a pattern begins to emerge from the chaos. Frightening, illogical, but flawless in its internal geometry. This is exactly what we are about to do. We will hang a map of our solar system and our recent past on the wall, and we will start connecting the dots. Because Stefan Burns's discovery, his triangle of light pulsating in time with a distant star, was not the end of the investigation. It was the key that unlocked a door to a much darker and more intricate room. It allowed us to see that the trickster event was not an isolated incident. It was a culmination. The culmination of a long, quiet, and meticulously choreographed play, performed on a cosmic stage right under our noses. Let's start at the epicenter. In the center of our map, we place the cluster of events from late October 2025. Point 1. The detection of the perfectly periodic radio signal FRB 2024-1027. Point 2. The global failure of the NTP time synchronization system. Point 3. An amateur telescope in Arizona detects 3 unknown objects optically pulsating in time with the radio signal. Point 4. A 3-day gap appears in NASA's public archives for data from the SETI spacecraft. The official version states, these are 4 separate, unrelated events. A scientific discovery, a technical glitch, an observer's error, and a scheduled delay in data transmission. 4 coincidences. But we already know this is a lie. Our cosmic mirror hypothesis ties these points together with a tight, unbreakable string. Burns's triangle of objects is the mirror. It reflects the signal from a distant magnetar, giving it its anomalous properties. A part of this signal, perhaps, carries a digital component that causes the failure on Earth. And the SETI spacecraft, being in the right place at the right time, saw something related to this process, which required the urgent concealment of data. This central node on our map is in itself proof of a coordinated operation to cover up the truth. But this is just the beginning. This is just the epicenter of the earthquake. Now let's look at the aftershocks and foreshocks, the strange events that preceded and followed that day, which the system also tried so hard to dismiss as coincidences. Let's draw the first string into the past, to the year 2022, to the New Horizons spacecraft. Everyone remembers its triumphant flyby of Pluto in 2015. But its mission didn't end there. It continued its journey into the farthest and most unexplored region of the solar system, the Kuiper Belt, an icy graveyard of construction debris left over from the birth of the planets. The official task of New Horizons at this stage was to search for and study Kuiper Belt objects. But there is another unstated task: to map the gravitational field at the edges of our system. And in March 2022, in one of the weekly mission status reports published on the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's website, a short, almost unnoticed entry appeared. It mentioned a series of unplanned correctional thruster firings. In simple terms, the spacecraft began to drift slightly off course, and the onboard computer had to use short bursts from the thrusters to bring it back on track. The official explanation was extremely dull and technical. Anomaly presumed to be caused by off-nominal performance of a microvalve in the hydrazine feed system, resulting in asymmetric thrust. Equipment failure. A common occurrence for a spacecraft that has been in the harsh conditions of space for many years. The entry remained on the site for a few days and was then removed during a routine update. No one, except a handful of engineers, paid any attention to it. But we, armed with the ephemeris of Burns's objects, did what no one else did. We ran a simulation and rewound the orbit of this triangle by 3 years. And we saw something that sends a chill down your spine. In March 2022, the trajectory of New Horizons and the calculated trajectory of the mirror intersected. Not closely, of course. They were several million kilometers apart. But on the scale of the Kuiper Belt, this was almost a collision. And if we assume that these 3 objects have significant mass, and they must have, then their gravitational influence would have been more than enough to cause the very subtle, perturbing effect on New Horizons that the engineers blamed on a faulty valve. The mysterious glitch was not a glitch. It was the first documented, though unrecognized, encounter between a human creation and this something. And the system, realizing this in hindsight, did what it does best: covered its tracks, deleting the report and leaving only silence behind. The first red string is drawn. Now let's draw the second string. From the world of astrophysics and orbital mechanics to the world of quiet offices, international diplomacy, and bureaucracy, to Geneva. Here, far from telescopes and spacecraft, a set of rules has existed for decades, known as the Post-Detection Policy for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or simply, the SETI protocols. It's not a law. It's more of a gentleman's agreement, developed by scientists and lawyers. It outlines what the scientific community should do if we ever actually receive a signal, how to verify it, how to ensure it's not a mistake, and most importantly, how and in what sequence to inform governments and the public. For decades, these protocols were more of a philosophical exercise, a theoretical game of what if. They hardly ever changed. But in September 2025, just 1 month before the Trickster event, something unprecedented happened. The protocols were secretly updated. This was not reported in any official press release. The information was leaked through an anonymous source in one of the UN committees that oversees the use of outer space. According to this leak, a new classified section was added to the main document. Appendix B, Containment Protocols for Echo and Mimicry class signals. The terms themselves already sound like science fiction. The document our source managed to obtain provided their definitions. An Echo class signal is a signal whose source is presumably outside the solar system, but which has been modified or re-emitted by an object or phenomenon within the solar system. A perfect description of our mirror hypothesis. A mimicry class signal, from the word mimicry, is a signal that imitates known natural astrophysical phenomena, but carries a hidden, artificial layer of information. A perfect description of what we hypothesized about the dual nature of the Trickster. But the most important part wasn't the definitions. It was the directives. Appendix B effectively nullified all the old principles of transparency. It mandated that upon detection of signals of these classes, all related data should be immediately classified as sensitive to international security. An information quarantine should be imposed, and all information should be handed over not to the scientific community, but to a special international rapid response group. Instead of preparing for a dialogue with the world, they were preparing to isolate it. They created the legal and bureaucratic tool for a total cover-up in advance, a month before the event. This is no longer just a reaction to an event. This is preparation for it. It proves that they knew. They didn't know exactly when it would happen, but they knew it was coming. They were waiting for it. And when it happened, they simply executed a pre-written script. The second red string is drawn. It connects space and politics, radio waves and secret directives. And now, let's draw the third, longest, and most frightening string. Back into the past, to August 15th, 1977. On that day, the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University recorded the most mysterious signal in the history of the SETI program, the WOW signal. It was a powerful, narrowband transmission that lasted for 72 seconds, coming from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It was such a perfect candidate for an artificial signal that astronomer Jerry Emmon, reviewing the printouts, circled it in red pen and wrote that one word in the margin: wow. This signal had all the characteristics we expected from an extraterrestrial message. But there was one problem. It never repeated. For decades, scientists pointed telescopes at that spot in the sky and heard nothing but silence. The WOW signal became a legend, a ghost, a symbol of great hope and great disappointment. Mainstream science never found an explanation for it. The most popular recent hypothesis is that it was a signal from a comet with an unusual chemical composition. A weak, stretched hypothesis that doesn't explain all the signal's properties. But it's convenient because it brings the anomaly back into the fold of natural, understandable phenomena. But what if the truth is much simpler, and at the same time, much more complex? What if the wow signal is another point on our map? We turn to computer modeling again. This was the most difficult task. We needed to rewind the mirror's orbit not by 3 years, but by almost 50. This required accounting for gravitational perturbations from all the planets, for the smallest nuances. It took weeks of calculations on a supercomputer cluster, access to which was provided by sympathizers at a European university. And when we got the result, we froze. According to our model, in August 1977, Burns's triangle of objects was in a completely different part of the solar system, and it was perfectly positioned on a line between Earth and, not the constellation Sagittarius. It was on a line between Earth and the center of our own galaxy, the Milky Way. The constellation Sagittarius just happened to be in the background, in the same direction. The center of our galaxy is a chaotic, churning place. It houses a supermassive black hole. Stars are constantly being born and dying, and cataclysms that generate random but powerful radio bursts are common. Our hypothesis is simple. The wow signal was not a message. It was another echo, another reflection. On that day, a random natural radio burst from the galactic center struck the surface of the mirror, which happened to be in the right position at that moment, and reflected towards Earth. And why didn't it repeat? Because by the time telescopes looked at that spot again, the mirror had already moved in its orbit. It was gone. They were looking for the source in the wrong place. They were looking for it 30,000 light years away, while it was right here, at home, and simply moving on. Now look at our map. 3 strings extending from the epicenter, 1 to New Horizons in the Kuiper Belt, proving the mirror's physical presence, a 2nd to the secret protocols in Geneva, proving the system's preparation for a cover-up, a 3rd to the wow signal in 1977, proving that this something has been in our system for at least half a century. This is no longer a set of coincidences. This is an architecture of silence, built over decades. An information cascade where seemingly disparate events, a gravitational anomaly, a bureaucratic directive, a historical mystery, and a modern radio signal merge into one deafening stream. A stream that carries one simple and terrifying idea. We are being watched. Have been for a long time. Methodically. And those who should have warned us have instead become the architects of the greatest cover-up in human history. And here arises the final, most important question of this stage of the investigation. Who? Who has enough power, enough influence, and enough long-term vision to conduct this orchestra of silence for decades? It can't be NASA. It can't be the government of a single country. Their planning horizons are too short, their budgets and leadership constantly changing. It must be something else, something supranational, quiet, almost invisible. And all the strings on our map, if followed to their very end, lead to one place. Not to NASA, not to the White House, but to a quiet, little-known committee at the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs in Vienna. Officially, it is called the Committee for the Coordination of Scientific Data and Protocols. Unofficially, as our source reported, it was this group, consisting not of politicians but of nameless scientists and analysts, that initiated the very same Appendix B. All the strings led to them, to the quiet, inconspicuous people who seem to know much more about what's happening than anyone else on this planet. And the biggest question now is, What do they know? And what are they preparing us all for in this deafening silence? When a detective investigating a complex case is convinced of the fact of a crime, his next step is to ask the oldest and most important question in criminology: cui bono? Who benefits? Who benefits from this complex, years-long, almost perfect cover-up of the truth? The simple explanation that first comes to mind is the classic conspiracy theory. Some shadowy group, the Men in Black, seeks to hide the truth from humanity for malicious reasons, to maintain their power and control. But this version is too simple, too cinematic to be true. Reality, especially bureaucratic reality, is rarely so dramatic. To understand the system's true motives, we must stop thinking of it as a malevolent monster. We must try to put ourselves in its shoes. We must understand its logic, its fears, and its goals. And then we will see that the cover-up was not just possible. From the system's point of view, it was the only correct, logical, and responsible decision. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine you are not an independent truth seeker, but the head of that quiet committee in Vienna, or the administrator of NASA, or a national security advisor in a leading world power. One morning, a folder marked "Top Secret" lands on your desk. Inside is irrefutable proof. There is an artificial object or a group of objects of unknown origin in our solar system. We don't know who created it. We don't know its purpose. We only know three things. First, its technological level is orders of magnitude, perhaps even millennia, beyond ours. It can manipulate radio waves in ways we can only dream of. It moves in a complex, possibly controlled orbit, remaining undetected by most of our tracking systems. Second, it is active. It's not just passing through. It is using our solar system as a giant observatory, and our planet as one of its reference points. It is observing. Perhaps us. Perhaps something else. Third, it is potentially dangerous. Its interaction with our technology, as the NTP failure showed, can be destructive, even if it was unintentional. What do you do with this information? Your first instinct, as a responsible leader, is to tell the truth. To hold a press conference and announce to the world, we are not alone. What happens in the next second? The world, as we know it, ceases to exist. Not necessarily in fire and chaos, as in Hollywood movies, although that is quite likely. The collapse will occur on a deeper, more fundamental level. Consider the financial markets. The entire global economy is an incredibly complex structure built on predictability and faith in the future. Stocks, bonds, currencies, all are held up by the collective belief that tomorrow will be like today. The news of a super civilization's presence in our system nullifies all forecasts. What will a share in an oil company be worth if tomorrow they share the technology of clean fusion with us? What will happen to the real estate market if it becomes clear that humanity could be relocated to another planet or, conversely, destroyed? Within hours, all the world's markets would plunge into an abyss from which they might never recover. Billions of people would lose their life savings. The global system of trade and supply would grind to a halt. Panic, famine, and riots would begin. Now let's look at religion and ideology. For millennia, world religions have placed man at the center of creation, making him God's unique interlocutor. National ideologies were built on the idea of sovereignty and the uniqueness of each nation. The news of the existence of others, and clearly more senior and powerful ones, delivers a fatal blow to these constructs. What does it mean to be a chosen people if there are hundreds of such peoples in the universe? What is the point of national borders in the face of a civilization for which our entire planet is but a grain of sand? This would cause the deepest existential crisis, which could lead to the emergence of new radical cults, religious wars, and the complete collapse of existing social structures. And finally, the most important thing, geopolitics and security. The very second the object's existence becomes public knowledge, a race will begin among all the countries of the world. Not an arms race, but something far more dangerous. A race for contact. Every country with space technology will try to be the first to establish contact, the first to gain access to their knowledge, their technology. Imagine a new Cold War, but the stake is not nuclear parity, but a 1,000-year technological advantage, at any cost. This would lead to the militarization of space on an unprecedented scale, to espionage, sabotage, and ultimately, to direct military conflict on Earth. A world balancing on the brink would be plunged into chaos. So, let's return to your quiet office. The folder is on your desk, and you have a choice. Tell the truth, and, with a 99% probability, trigger the collapse of human civilization. Or, hide it. Place this truth in the deepest, darkest safe imaginable. Build an architecture of silence around it, and try to buy time. Time to study the object. Time to understand its intentions. Time to prepare humanity, slowly, carefully, step by step, for the idea that we are not alone. What would you choose? Any responsible leader, any person who thinks in terms of the survival of the species, not personal glory, would choose the second option. The cover-up is not an act of malice. It is an act of desperate, almost tragic responsibility. It is the only logical decision. To understand that this is not just our speculation, let's look at history. The system has done this before. It has experience in hiding the truth for the greater good. Remember the Manhattan Project. For several years, tens of thousands of people worked on creating the atomic bomb, but the vast majority had no idea of the ultimate goal of their work. It was the greatest scientific cover-up of the 20th century, and it was justified by the need to win a war. Remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident, when the US government used fabricated data to escalate the war in Vietnam. Remember the CIA's MK-Ultra program, in which experiments on mind control were conducted on unsuspecting citizens. In each of these cases, the system decided that its goals, be it national security or geopolitical dominance, were more important than the public's right to the truth. The psychology of power doesn't change. Only the scale of the threats, and accordingly, the scale of the cover-up change. Now let's look at how exactly they could have implemented this plan. It's not done on the orders of one person. It's done by creating a bureaucratic culture, a culture of compartmentalized knowledge. Everyone sees only their small piece of the puzzle. The radio astronomers working on the trickster see an anomalous signal and receive an order to apply a new artifact suppression filter. They don't know what this filter actually does. They are simply following a technical directive. The engineers investigating the NTP failure see anomalous network traffic and are instructed to blame it on resonance in the software. They don't know where this traffic came from. The lawyers in Geneva are tasked with drafting a new Appendix B to the SETI protocols, justifying it with the need to adapt to new types of potential threats. They don't know that this threat is already at the gates. No one, except for a tiny group at the very top, that same group in Vienna, sees the whole picture. This is the architecture of silence. It is built not on lies, but on half-truths, on omissions, on bureaucratic inertia. Everyone does their job. Everyone believes they are acting rationally, and the result is a perfect cover-up. But cui bono? Who benefits in the end? If we set aside the idea of protecting humanity from panic, another, more cynical, and perhaps more realistic motive remains. Technological advantage. The group, the committee that possesses the full scope of information, holds the greatest trump card in history. They are the only ones who can attempt to make contact. They are the only ones who can try to understand and perhaps replicate the mirror's technology. Imagine they succeed. They gain access to energy sources, communication methods, materials we cannot even imagine. This would give the supranational group behind the committee absolute power over the rest of humanity. They could decide the fate of nations, manage the economy, control information on a level that dictators of the past could only dream of. And here, we arrive at the most disturbing thought. What if the cover-up is not aimed at protecting society, but at preparing for something, without its knowledge? What if they hid the truth not to protect us from panic? They hid it to buy time. Time to prepare a response that we will never be told about. Perhaps they are trying to create their own weapons based on these technologies. Perhaps they are preparing some kind of first contact protocol in which the rest of humanity is assigned the role of passive spectators, or even worse, a bargaining chip. We thought the main threat was the mirror itself. But what if the real threat are those who have placed themselves between us and this mystery? Those who have arrogated to themselves the right to decide for 7 billion people whether we are ready for the truth. They have become monopolists on contact. And in this silence they have created, they can do whatever they want. They could be preparing for dialogue, or they could be preparing for war. And we won't know until it's too late. Such is the logic of the system, a logic of fear, control, and preemption. And, as terrifying as it is to admit, from their perspective, it is flawless. Our investigation has led us down the winding corridors of power, into the quiet offices of Geneva, and into the cold, digital vaults of data archives. We have uncovered the motives of the system. We have understood the logic of its fear and its control. But in chasing shadows on Earth, we risk losing sight of the main subject of our investigation, the very thing that started this whole chain of events, the enigmatic object itself. It's time to return to the cold, silent void of space and conduct a detailed, almost forensic analysis of what we've called the mirror. Based on the crumbs of information we have, the images from Stefan Burns, the gravitational signature left on New Horizons' trajectory, and the properties of the signal it reflected, we will try to reconstruct the anatomy of this ghost. We will try to understand not just what it does, but what it is. And what we discover will go far beyond a simple passive reflector. We will see signs of a complex, active, and possibly living machine. Let's start with its most basic characteristic, its structure. Stefan Burns saw 3 separate points of light flying in a perfect triangular formation. This is not a single, monolithic object. It is a cluster, a system of at least 3 components, separated, according to preliminary calculations, by tens, perhaps even hundreds of kilometers. This fact alone speaks volumes. No natural mechanism exists that can hold 3 unconnected bodies in such a rigid and perfect formation for decades, if not centuries. Gravitational perturbations from the sun and planets would inevitably destroy this formation. The only way to maintain such a configuration is through active control. Each of the 3 components must have its own propulsion system and constantly correct its position relative to the others. These are not just 3 rocks flying together. This is a squadron, a coordinated team. It is an artificial self-regulating structure. Moving on. The orbit. Our calculations based on data from different years show something completely inexplicable from the standpoint of standard celestial mechanics. The mirror's orbit is not a simple ellipse around the sun, like that of planets or asteroids. It is complex, almost chaotic at first glance. It sometimes approaches the ecliptic plane, where all the planets orbit, and then veers far to the north or south at high angles. It has no clearly defined perihelion or aphelion. But if we apply more complex analytical methods to this chaos, particularly resonance theory, a hidden order begins to emerge. It turns out that the mirror's orbit is designed to enter into complex gravitational resonances with the largest bodies in the solar system: Jupiter, Saturn, and even the system's center of mass. It's like an expert surfer using waves to move with minimal energy expenditure. The mirror uses the gravitational fields of the planets to perform complex, almost impossible maneuvers that have allowed it to remain undetected for so long. It doesn't just fly, it dances. It performs a complex gravitational ballet, using the entire solar system as its stage. To create and maintain such an orbit is a task at the very limit of even our modern computational capabilities. And to enter it from interstellar space requires a level of navigational skill we can't even dream of yet. Now for the most interesting part, its physical properties. What are these objects? What are they made of? We don't have a direct answer, but we can make educated guesses based on how they interact with radiation. Remember that they reflect radio waves in a narrow frequency band with incredible efficiency, close to 100%. Yet, in the optical range, they are almost invisible. Their albedo, or reflectivity, is extremely low, like the darkest coal. They're almost perfectly black. This combination of properties, perfect reflection in the radio spectrum and perfect absorption in the visible spectrum, is not found in any known natural material. This is a property of so-called metamaterials, artificial structures whose optical and electromagnetic properties are determined not so much by their chemical composition as by their microscopic geometry. We on Earth are just beginning to experiment with such things in laboratories, creating invisibility cloaks for microwave radiation. And here, we see a kilometer-sized object that is, in essence, a giant, perfectly tuned metamaterial. Let's imagine its surface. Perhaps it's not a smooth mirror, but a complex fractal structure like a crystal or a snowflake, but on a macroscopic scale. Billions of tiny, perfectly oriented elements, perhaps nanometer-sized, that act as a single phased array antenna. When a dirty radio signal from a magnetar hits this surface, this structure doesn't just reflect it, it analyzes it, extracts the carrier frequency and periodicity from the noise, and then re-emits it as a perfect clean pulse, synchronizing the operation of all three components of the cluster. This is not a mirror. It is an active repeater. It is a solar-powered machine that draws energy for its operation, perhaps from sunlight itself, which would explain its black, absorbent color, or directly from the energy of the signal it reflects. It is this very process that generates the faint optical flash detected by Stephen Burns. No energy conversion is 100% efficient. Some energy is inevitably lost, in this case, in the form of visible light photons. This flash is the thermal exhaust, a byproduct of the operation of a giant cosmic processor. The very fact that we can see it speaks to the colossal power this machine wields. Now let's put it all together. We are dealing with a cluster of three self-propelled objects, flying in perfect formation on a highly complex gravitational orbit. The surface of each is a giant metamaterial, capable of functioning as a hyper-efficient and ultra-precise radio repeater. This is not just a piece of alien metal. It is not just a probe. It is an instrument of incredible complexity and a purpose we are only beginning to dimly guess. Why would anyone place such a complex and costly device in our solar system? The first thought is that it's a communication tool. Perhaps it's part of a giant interstellar communications network, and our solar system is just a convenient point for relaying signals from one part of the galaxy to another. They use distant magnetars as natural beacons, and the mirror as a communication node that amplifies and redirects these signals onward. In this scenario, we, humanity, are just accidental witnesses, ants living on a telephone pole, mistaking the hum of the wires for the voice of God. This hypothesis is convenient and not so frightening. It makes us insignificant, but it leaves us safe. But there is a second, far more disturbing version. What if it's not just a repeater? What if it's a scanner? What if the mirror uses distant natural sources of radiation, like magnetars, to scan through space? It's similar to how we use X-rays to study the internal structure of objects. We send radiation and see what passes through and what is absorbed or reflected. What if the mirror is doing the same thing, but on a cosmic scale? It catches the signal from a magnetar, reflects it towards Earth, and then analyzes how that signal is changed after passing through space, past the sun, through its corona, through Earth's magnetosphere. It's not studying us, it's studying our environment. It's mapping magnetic fields, gravitational anomalies, the density of interplanetary plasma. It's performing a tomography of the solar system. Why? Perhaps for navigation, or perhaps in preparation. Preparation for something that requires a perfect knowledge of local conditions. And here we come to the strangest, most inexplicable detail that hints at its true, perhaps terrifying, purpose. When we analyzed the mirror's future orbit, we found that it is not stable in the long term. In a few decades, after a series of complex gravitational maneuvers around Jupiter and Saturn, its trajectory will change dramatically. It will no longer circle in the outer reaches of the system. It will begin to move inward. Its new, future perihelion, the point of closest approach to the Sun, will be inside Earth's orbit. But that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was the vector of its subsequent motion after this approach. Its trajectory did not lead out of the system, as one might expect from an object performing a gravitational maneuver. It led to us. More precisely, to the L1 Lagrange point of the Earth-Sun system, a unique spot where the gravitational pull of our planet and our star balance each other out. An object placed at this point can remain stationary relative to Earth, hanging forever between us and the Sun. It is the perfect observation post, the perfect staging ground. This no longer looks like a passive repeater or a scientific scanner. This looks like a slow, methodical approach, calibrated over decades. A change of position. A preparation for a new phase of the operation, the content of which we can only guess. They are not just passing by. They are not just observing from afar. They are coming here. And this whole complex game of hide and seek, all these perfect signals, all this gravitational lacework, is just a prelude. A prelude to the moment when this black, triangular ghost ceases to be just a reflection in a telescope and becomes a reality hanging in our sky. And the realization of this fact changes everything. We can no longer afford the luxury of being mere observers, because we, it seems, are at the final destination. At the very moment our investigation reaches its climax, when all the threads converge on a single point, and the alarming picture of the future gains a frightening clarity, it is necessary to take a step back, to turn on the cold light of skepticism and unleash the full force of rational counterarguments upon our own beautiful and elegant edifice. This is the principle of the pendulum of plausibility. We have brought the viewer to the peak of belief in our theory, to goosebumps from the realization of an existential threat. And now, we must swing the pendulum in the opposite direction, not to destroy our hypothesis, but to temper it in the fire of doubt, to show that we have considered all alternatives, that we are honest with ourselves and with the audience. Only by passing through this crucible of skepticism can our theory lay claim to something more than just a captivating story. It can lay claim to being a disturbing truth. Let's for a moment forget about secret protocols, gravitational maneuvers, and metamaterials. Let's come back down to Earth and look at this whole story through the eyes of the system, through the eyes of a sober, pragmatic, perhaps even cynical scientist who works with real data every day, not speculative models. What would they see? They would see a chain of unrelated events that a group of enthusiasts with an overly active imagination has artificially woven into a single conspiracy. Let's dissect their arguments one by one and see how convincing they are. Let's start with the main thing, the signal itself, the trickster event. We argued that its perfect periodicity, clean shape, and anomalous polarization cannot be explained by natural causes. But is that really the case? The science of extreme astrophysical objects is still in its infancy. Magnetars are some of the most mysterious and poorly understood objects in the universe. We have never seen one up close. All our knowledge about them comes from models built on indirect data. Who can say with certainty that in this diversity of extreme conditions, a magnetar with unique properties cannot be born? Consider a model recently proposed by a group of theorists at Caltech. They suggested that FRB 2024-1027 does not come from a lone magnetar, but from a binary system where a magnetar orbits a medium-mass black hole. The bursts occur when the magnetar passes through the black hole's accretion disk, a dense cloud of superheated gas. This interaction, like a bow on a string, causes resonant oscillations in the magnetar's magnetosphere, which generate the perfectly periodic, clean signals. And the dense, ordered magnetic field of the accretion disk itself creates that very anomalous but stable polarization. Is this model complex? Yes. Does it require the rarest of circumstances? Absolutely. But it does not violate any known laws of physics. It is a natural, albeit exotic, explanation. And according to Occam's razor, the simplest principle of logic states that one should not multiply entities without necessity. Why invent an alien mirror when a complex but natural astrophysical model can explain the same thing? This is the first and most powerful blow to our theory. Moving on. The ghostly pre-signal and the mysterious filter that removed it. We presented this as a smoking gun, proof of a cover-up. But to an engineer working with a radio telescope, it looks very different. The VLA is an incredibly complex instrument. Dozens of antennas, hundreds of kilometers of cables, thousands of electronic components. In such a system, instrumental artifacts are constantly occurring. False signals caused by interference, internal reflections within the equipment, or even the operation of nearby devices. The engineer's job is to constantly improve algorithms to clean the useful signal from this junk. What if Transient Artifact Suppression Module 7B is not a sinister tool of censorship, but simply a new experimental software module that the development team was testing that day? A module that turned out to be too aggressive and mistakenly removed not only noise, but also part of a real, albeit weak, signal? This is not a conspiracy. It's a normal workflow. A mistake, a bug that was possibly fixed later. And the fact that it's not in the public documentation is easily explained by bureaucratic inertia. They just didn't get around to updating the manuals. Boring? Yes. Prosaic? Absolutely. But far more likely than a theory of a global cover-up of an information virus. Now for Stefan Burns's triangle. 3 dim points, pulsating in time with a radio signal. This seems to be our strongest card, but let's look at it critically. Stefan Burns is a talented engineer, but he is one man. His equipment, though unique, is not certified, has not undergone independent verification. What if he fell victim to a subtle, elusive artifact? For instance, electrical interference. Imagine that the incredibly powerful radio pulse from the trickster, upon reaching Earth, created brief interference in the power grid, or even directly in the sensitive electronics of his cameras. This interference could have caused microscopic voltage fluctuations, leading to false pixel triggers on the sensor, the very dim flashes. And since all 3 telescopes are connected to the same grid and are in the same region, they reacted synchronously. To his algorithm, it looks like a real object with parallax. But in reality, it was just a ghost, born in the silicon of his own instruments. Hence the perfect synchronization with the radio signal. It's not the reaction of an object in space. It's the reaction of equipment on Earth. And again, this explanation doesn't require aliens. It just requires a knowledge of physics and electronics. And what about all our other clues? The gravitational anomaly with New Horizons? It can be blamed on a faulty valve, as the original report stated. The update to the SETI protocols? It could be a long overdue bureaucratic procedure, an attempt to adapt outdated documents to modern realities, which by pure chance coincided with the discovery of the trickster. The NTP failure? The world of technology is complex and fragile, cascading failures happen, and trying to link them to a radio signal from another galaxy is a classic example of apophenia, a cognitive bias where one sees connections where none exist. Our entire grand conspiracy theory, when viewed from this perspective, collapses like a house of cards. It turns into a set of disparate, unrelated anomalies, each with its own, albeit not always obvious, rational explanation. It's just a chain of incredible, statistically improbable, but still possible coincidences. And any scientist will tell you that correlation does not imply causation. Yes, all this happened at roughly the same time, but that doesn't prove that one caused the other. Perhaps we just fell victim to confirmation bias. We wanted to find a conspiracy so badly that we started seeing its signs everywhere, ignoring simpler and more logical explanations. It would seem simple, an unusual natural phenomenon, a series of coincidences. We could end it there. Our investigation has hit a dead end, shattered against the wall of common sense and scientific skepticism. The pendulum has swung all the way to the side of rationality. And at this very moment, when the viewer's belief has almost faded, we deliver a devastating counterblow. We present the last, most irrefutable fact, which once again shatters this beautiful, reassuring picture of the official version. There was something else, one detail that none of the skeptics could explain. And this detail brings us back to the very first event, the radio signal. All our reasoning about models with black holes and accretion disks was based on the assumption that the signal's source is where the astronomers placed it, in a distant galaxy 3 billion light-years away. But how did they even determine that distance? They did it using an effect called dispersion measure. Radio waves of different frequencies travel through interstellar plasma at slightly different speeds. Lower frequencies are delayed compared to higher ones. By measuring this delay, one can calculate how much plasma was in the signal's path and, knowing the average density of plasma in the universe, estimate the distance to the source. It's a standard, proven method, but it has one weak spot. It assumes that all the plasma causing the delay is between us and the source. What if that's not the case? What if a significant portion of this plasma is right here in our solar system? Our community of independent researchers conducted one last most important analysis. We took all the recorded pulses of the trickster over several months of observation. During this time, the Earth moved in its orbit, changing its position relative to the supposed source. And if the source is truly 3 billion light-years away, our movement should have virtually no effect on the signal's properties. We are like an ant crawling on a soccer ball. Our displacement is negligible compared to the distance to the stands. But we discovered the impossible. We found tiny, microscopic, but systematic changes in the signal's dispersion measure. These changes were periodic, and their period was equal to 1 Earth year. The signal changed depending on where the Earth was in its orbit. This effect, the so-called annual modulation, could mean only one thing. A significant part of the plasma affecting the signal is not in a distant galaxy, but here, inside the solar system. It's like a fog that thickens and thins as we move through it. But that's not all. The magnitude of this modulation allowed us to calculate something much more important. It allowed us to triangulate the position of the object, creating the bulk of this dispersion delay. And this object was not 3 billion light-years away. It was located exactly where Stefan Burns's triangle was calculated to be. This was irrefutable. This was something that could not be dismissed as an instrument error or a coincidence. These were numbers etched into the very fabric of the signal. They proved that the source of the anomalous polarization and dispersion is here, in our solar system. And that, in turn, meant that the entire official version with the magnetar in a distant galaxy was not just incorrect, it was fundamentally false. They were measuring the distance to a ghost, a mirage, not understanding that the real object was standing right in front of them. And this fact, this annual modulation of the dispersion measure, was the killer of all rational explanations. It tied all the dots together again, but this time, not with the red string of speculation, but with the steel cable of mathematical proof. The pendulum swung back, and this time, it would never return. When mathematical proof, like a lightning strike, illuminates a dark room full of ghosts and shadows, arguments cease. The annual modulation of the dispersion measure, that subtle, almost invisible ripple on the signal surface, synchronized with Earth's motion, became the irrefutable fact that moved our investigation from the realm of conspiracy theory to the realm of stark, undeniable reality. The object is here. It is real, and it is actively interacting with the radiation passing through our solar system. This conclusion is so fundamental that it forces us to expand the scope of our investigation. We can no longer speak of this as an isolated astronomical mystery. We must place this anomaly in a broader context, the context of our own rapidly changing technological landscape. Because the line between their supposed technologies and our own achievements is becoming increasingly blurry and unsettling. And the question we must ask ourselves is this: if we, humanity, are on the verge of creating technologies capable of such wonders, why are we so certain that someone else hasn't crossed that threshold long ago? Let's take a brief tour of the forefront of human ingenuity, to the laboratories where the magic of the 21st century is born. Let's start with metamaterials, which we hypothesized make up the mirror. 20 years ago, this word sounded like science fiction. Today, it is one of the most rapidly developing fields of physics and engineering. Scientists at MIT and Imperial College London are already creating materials that can manipulate light and other electromagnetic waves in ways impossible in nature. They have learned to make objects invisible to radar, creating invisibility cloaks. They are building super lenses capable of focusing light with a resolution that exceeds fundamental physical limits. They are developing smart surfaces that can change their reflective and absorptive properties on command. How does it work? The secret is not in chemistry, but in geometry. Imagine a material riddled with billions of microscopic resonators, antennas, or waveguides, smaller than the wavelength of the radiation they control. These structures, like a well-trained army, intercept an incoming wave, manipulate its phase and amplitude, and then re-radiate it in the desired direction with the desired properties. We can currently create only small samples of such materials, a few centimeters in size. Their production is incredibly complex and expensive. But what if a civilization, 1,000 or 1,000,000 years ahead of us, has mastered self-assembly technology at the nano level? What if they can grow such metamaterials in the vacuum of space, creating kilometer-sized structures just as we grow crystals in a lab? The object we see, perfectly black in visible light and perfectly reflective in the radio spectrum, is not magic. It is simply the next logical step in the development of a technology whose foundations we are laying right now. We are learning to write the first letters in the alphabet of matter manipulation. They, it seems, are already writing symphonies with it. Now let's look at another field, artificial intelligence and autonomous systems. We hypothesize that the mirror is not a passive object, but an active, self-regulating machine, flying on a highly complex calibrated orbit. Not long ago, Controlling such an object would have required constant supervision from base. But today, we are on the cusp of an era of truly autonomous systems. Our own Mars rovers, like Perseverance, already possess elements of autonomy. They can independently choose routes, avoid obstacles, and make decisions without commands from Earth. The neural networks we are creating are already capable of managing complex systems, from power grids to swarms of drones, far more effectively than humans. They can analyze vast streams of data, find hidden patterns, and optimize their operations in real time. Now, imagine a next-generation AI. Not one that writes texts or draws pictures, but a specialized, brilliant autopilot. An AI whose sole purpose is to navigate and maintain the formation of a 3-object cluster in the chaotic gravitational environment of the solar system for centuries. Such an AI could use data on planetary positions, solar wind, and gravitational fluctuations for constant, second-by-second course corrections, using hyper-efficient engines, perhaps ion drives, or even more exotic types. That complex, dancing orbit we observe is not just a beautiful ballet. It is the optimal solution to a navigational problem found by a super-intelligent autopilot. A solution that minimizes energy consumption while making the object practically invisible to our tracking systems, which look for simple, predictable, elliptical orbits. And again, we are not seeing a miracle. We are seeing the application of a technology that we ourselves are desperately trying to create. We are building toy boats in a puddle, while they have already sent their autonomous aircraft carrier on a voyage across the ocean. And finally, the most disturbing parallel. The idea of a signal virus, a digital component capable of interacting with our technologies. In the world of cybersecurity, this is called a zero-day attack, exploiting an unknown vulnerability in software. But what if there is a whole new class of attacks? Physical layer attacks. In 2018, a group of researchers from the University of Michigan demonstrated something similar. Using a specially modulated laser beam aimed at a smartphone's microphone, they were able to transmit commands inaudible to humans and make it perform actions, make calls, open websites. They turned light into code. Another group learned to do the same with radio waves, affecting unprotected components in electronic circuits. These are crude, primitive experiments. But they prove the principle itself. Electromagnetic radiation can be more than just a carrier of information. It can be the command itself. It can directly interact with the physical structure of our processors, our networks, our synchronization systems. Now imagine that the civilization that created the mirror understands our technology better than we do. They could have been studying our radio transmissions for decades. They could have analyzed the architecture of our internet, our protocols, our deepest vulnerabilities. That ghostly pre-signal we detected could have been exactly that. A perfectly calibrated, multi-dimensional electromagnetic pulse designed not to transmit a message, but to cause a specific resonance in certain types of silicon chips used in NTP servers. It's not a virus in the classic sense. It's a key that perfectly fits a lock we didn't even know existed. And the NTP failure was not an attack. Perhaps it was just a test, a demonstration of capability. A quiet click meant to tell us, we are here, and we can turn off your world whenever we choose. And here we arrive at the central existential question born from this technological context. If we can imagine it, if we can lay the theoretical groundwork for it, if we are already taking the first clumsy steps in these directions, then why do we continue to cling so stubbornly to the idea of our technological solitude? This is a cognitive dissonance of cosmic proportions. We are creating AIs that will soon surpass us in every way, yet we refuse to believe that a similar process could have occurred elsewhere in the universe. We are building metamaterials, but we consider an object made of such a material in space to be a miracle. We are learning to hack matter at a physical level, but we are terrified by the thought that someone might apply this knowledge against us. Perhaps the greatest cover-up, the greatest blind spot, is not in the NASA archives, but in our own consciousness. We live in an age of technological explosion that should have made us more open to the idea of more advanced civilizations. But instead, it seems to have made us even more arrogant. We look at our own creations and think we are the pinnacle of evolution. But what if we are just children playing with fire on the shore of an ocean, oblivious to something ancient, wise, and incomprehensible watching us from the depths? What if all our advanced technologies, AI, quantum computing, the synthetic skies we create, are not a path to our dominion, but merely a repetition of a path someone else walked millions of years ago? We are learning to create illusions in the sky, launching swarms of drones that paint pictures. But what if someone has long been using these illusions against us, showing us only what we are prepared to see? A convenient, safe mirage of a distant magnetar, hiding their true, frightening reality behind it? The technological horizon we see before us may just be an echo of their distant past. And realizing this fact should not be frightening, but sobering. It should make us look at anomalies not as errors or miracles, but as possible traces of those who are ahead. We have come a long way. We have descended into the rabbit hole of conspiracy, fought through the jungle of mathematical proofs, and peered into the dazzling abyss of our own technological ambitions. We have pieced together all the clues, connected all the dots, and built a convincing, consistent, and terrifyingly logical picture of what is happening. But now that the intellectual part of the investigation is complete, we must take the final and most difficult step. We must stop, be silent, and reflect. We must ask not the questions of what and how, but the ultimate existential question: what does it all mean? What does it mean for us, for humanity, for every single person living on this planet, if everything we have unearthed is true? We must dive into the philosophical horizon, into the existential chasm that opens beneath our feet the moment we accept this new reality. Because this knowledge doesn't just change our understanding of the cosmos, it changes our understanding of ourselves. Throughout its conscious history, humanity has lived with a feeling that can be called existential loneliness. We looked at the stars and saw in them either the cold, indifferent majesty of inanimate nature or the reflection of a divine plan with us at its center. In both cases, we were unique. We were the sole bearers of reason, the only witnesses to this great cosmic spectacle. This idea was both frightening and comforting. Frightening, because it placed the full burden of responsibility for the future of intelligence in the universe on us. Comforting, because it gave us a sense of specialness, of being chosen, making our short existence meaningful on an eternal scale. Everything we did, our wars, our love, our art, our science, had absolute value because no one else was doing it. We were the only flicker of consciousness in an endless dark night. The new reality revealed to us by the mirror destroys this illusion with the ruthlessness of a forest fire. We are not alone, and we are likely not even the most interesting ones who are not alone. We are not a fire in the night. We are a dim candle in a city flooded with neon light. Our art? To them it might look like children's drawings. Our science? Perhaps it seems like naive alchemy to them. Our wars and conflicts? Most likely they see in them only the meaningless hustle and bustle of an anthill, not even worthy of mention. To realize this is a blow to the very root of our collective ego. It is a displacement from the pedestal we built for ourselves. We cease to be the measure of all things. We become just one of countless examples, perhaps not even a very successful one. This realization forces us to look anew at one of the greatest paradoxes of our time, the Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? Why do we see no clear signs of other civilizations? We have come up with dozens of explanations. Perhaps we are truly alone. The rare Earth hypothesis. Perhaps intelligent life inevitably self-destructs before reaching for the stars. The great filter hypothesis. Perhaps they are so different that we are simply incapable of recognizing them. But the mirror offers us another, much simpler and more unsettling solution to this paradox. The answer to the question, where is everybody, is, they are here. They have always been here. But they do not want us to see them. And this leads us to the darkest and perhaps most realistic of all hypotheses about the behavior of highly advanced civilizations, the dark forest hypothesis. This concept was popularized by the Chinese science fiction writer Liu Cixin, but its roots go deep into game theory and evolutionary biology. The universe, according to this hypothesis, is a dark forest. Countless hunters are hiding in this forest. Each hunter must adhere to two simple rules of survival. First, remain hidden. Anyone who reveals their presence risks attracting the attention of other, more powerful hunters. Second, destroy anyone else you find. Not because you are evil, but because you cannot be sure of their intentions. Maybe they are friendly, or maybe they are just pretending to get closer. The risk is too great. In a situation where you know nothing about the other, and interstellar distances make any dialogue practically impossible, the safest strategy is a preemptive strike. This is why the cosmos is silent. This great silence is not a sign of the absence of life. It's a sign of its presence and its extreme caution. Intelligent civilizations do not shout about themselves with the full power of their transmitters. They hide. They listen. They build their homes in the shadows, camouflaging the windows and turning off the lights. And we, humanity, for the past century, have been behaving like a lost child in this forest, shouting, singing songs, and building a big, bright bonfire of our radio and television broadcasts. We have been incredibly naive, incredibly foolish. And the mirror, perhaps, is the first hunter drawn to the light of our bonfire. It does not attack. It does not rush. It is simply sat down at a safe distance, camouflaged as a shadow, and is watching, studying, assessing the threat level. And we don't even know it's already here. We continue to dance carelessly by the fire. This perspective changes everything. It turns our story from a story of contact into a story of survival. The mirror ceases to be just a scientific mystery. It becomes a potential threat. Its silent presence is not an invitation to dialogue. It is the ticking of a clock. And the cover-up orchestrated by the system in this light no longer looks like a betrayal. It starts to look like a desperate, belated attempt to extinguish our bonfire. An attempt to pretend we are not here, that all this noise was just an accident. An attempt to drag the screaming child back into the shadows before someone else, who might not be such a patient observer, notices. But there is another, no less profound interpretation. What if the mirror is not a hunter? What if it is something else entirely? Let's recall another hypothesis, proposed by Ronald Bracewell back in the 1960s, the Bracewell probe hypothesis. Bracewell suggested that interstellar communication via radio signals is inefficient due to the immense time delays. It would be far more logical for an advanced civilization to send out millions of small, autonomous, self-replicating probes across the galaxy. These probes, upon arriving in a star system where life might arise, do not interfere. They simply enter a dormant mode and wait for millennia, for millions of years. They wait until the local civilization reaches a certain technological level. For example, invents radio. Only then does the probe activate and initiate contact. What if the mirror is such a probe? It arrived in our system, perhaps millions of years ago, when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth. It assumed its complex, stealthy orbit and went quiet, and it waited. It listened. And then, a century ago, It heard us, our first clumsy radio broadcasts, and it began to act according to its programming. But its program is not to fly in and say hello. Its program is much more complex. Perhaps it's a test. It creates an anomaly, the trickster event, and watches how we react. Can we notice it? Can we interpret it correctly? Can we distinguish the natural from the artificial? And most importantly, how will our society behave when faced with such a mystery? Will we begin to cooperate, or will we start to fight? Will we tell the truth, or will we start to hide it? Perhaps everything that is happening now is an examination, a test of maturity that we are taking without even realizing it. And the outcome of this test will determine whether we are deemed worthy of the next step in contact or are judged a dead-end species, better left to mature for another few millennia. In this worldview, we cease to be victims in a dark forest. We become students in a cosmic school. And this knowledge, though no less unsettling, also carries hope. It tells us that our actions matter, that our choice to seek the truth or accept the lie, to cooperate or to conflict, could have consequences of a cosmic scale. And so we stand on the edge of this existential abyss, peering into its depths. On one side, the icy terror of the dark forest. On the other, the stern hope of the Bracewell exam. Which of these realities is ours? We do not know. And perhaps the mirror itself is merely a projection of our own fears and hopes. But one thing we know for sure: the world will never be the same. The very fact of this proven but unexplained anomaly has forever poisoned the well of our quiet ignorance. We are now a civilization that knows there is something behind the curtain. We don't know what it is. An actor ready to take a bow, or an executioner sharpening his axe. But we know the curtain exists, and this knowledge is a heavy burden. Perhaps the silence of space is not the absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors pay to the dead. And the most important question facing us now is, on which side of this silence will we find ourselves? Philosophical abysses are alluring in their depth, but an investigation cannot forever hover in the empyrean of existential questions. Sooner or later, the detective must return from the cold streets of speculation to the warm office cluttered with facts and look at the calendar once more. Because any complex, time-extended operation, be it a crime or a scientific observation, has its key moments, its windows of opportunity. And our investigation, having moved from analyzing the past to contemplating the present, must now cast its gaze to the future, to a specific, tangible future, marked on the calendars of all the world's space agencies. Because an event is already dawning on the horizon that promises to be the next, and perhaps decisive moment of truth in this drama. An event that will either confirm our wildest theories or shatter them completely. We're talking about the European Space Agency's mission named Hera. And this mission, unwittingly, is flying straight into the lion's mouth. To understand the full irony and drama of the situation, you need the backstory. The Hera mission is a real, planned space project. Its official goal is noble and crucial for the survival of humanity. It is the European part of the first ever planetary defense mission, initiated by NASA's DART spacecraft. In 2022, the DART spacecraft successfully rammed the small asteroid Dimorphos, which orbits the larger asteroid Didymos. It was an experiment. We wanted to see if we could, like a billiard player, change the trajectory of an asteroid that might threaten Earth. The impact was a success. Dimorphos' orbit changed. But by how much exactly? What were the consequences of the impact? Did it create a crater? Did the asteroid's structure change? To answer these questions, we are sending Hera. This spacecraft, scheduled to launch in late 2024, will arrive at the Didymos Dimorphos system in 2026. Like a detective at a crime scene, it will conduct a detailed post-impact survey, create three-dimensional maps, and study the composition of the ejected material. Its job is to gather all the data so that in the future, if needed, we can deliver such planetary strikes with maximum precision and effectiveness. This is the official story. Beautiful, heroic, and understandable to taxpayers. A mission to save the world. But in the light of our investigation, this story takes on entirely new, sinister colors. Because, as is often the case in matters of great cover-ups, what's important is not so much the destination, but what lies along the way. We took the published official flight trajectory of Hera and overlaid it on our painstakingly calculated projected orbit of the Mirror. And what we saw made us question whether it was a coincidence. In mid-2026, a few months before arriving at its primary target, the asteroid Didymos, Hera's trajectory will pass in direct, almost provocative proximity to one of the three objects in the Burns cluster. The separation will be, according to our calculations, less than 100,000 kilometers, about 62,000 miles. On the scale of the solar system, this is not just a close approach. It's almost a rendezvous. It's like two ships in the Pacific Ocean passing within arm's length of each other. The probability of such a random coincidence is infinitesimally small. It's 1 in billions. And this forces us to ask a direct and uncomfortable question. Is the asteroid Didymos really the main goal of the mission? Or is it just a convenient, noble cover story? A smokescreen created to justify sending a state-of-the-art research probe to the exact point in space, and at the exact time where it can get a close-up look at the Mirror. Let's imagine the logic of the system of that same committee in Vienna. They know about the Mirror's existence. They know it's real. But their knowledge, like ours, is based on indirect data, reflected signals and dim lights in amateur telescopes. That's not enough. They need to see it up close. They need high-resolution images. They need a spectral analysis of its surface. They need to measure its mass, magnetic field, thermal signature. But how to do this without attracting attention? They can't just announce, "We are launching a mission to a mysterious alien artifact." That would cause the very panic and chaos they fear so much. They need a cover, and a planetary defense mission is the perfect cover. No one will ask unnecessary questions. Everyone will applaud their concern for Earth's safety. And meanwhile, in deep space, Hera will perform its main, secret maneuver. For a few hours or days, it will turn its cameras away from the void and point them at the true target of its journey. It will collect the very data that will either become the greatest discovery in history or the most terrifying warning. And this data, of course, will never make it into the public archives. It will end up in the same secret folders where the raw waveforms of the trickster and the missing telemetry from Psyche already reside. This is not just a hypothesis. We started looking for confirmation, and we found it. Hidden in plain sight in the mission's technical documents, which are public, but rarely read. First, on board Hera, in addition to the standard set of cameras and spectrometers, there is one very strange instrument, atypical for such a mission. It's called the LFR, Low Frequency Radiometer. Officially, it is designed to study the interaction of the solar wind with the asteroid's surface. But its operating frequency range, it almost perfectly matches the range in which the trickster broadcasts. It's like sending an ornithologist to study penguins in Antarctica, but giving them an ultrasonic bat detector. It makes no sense. Unless the real target isn't penguins. Unless the real target is to try to eavesdrop on the Mirror's operation up close, to catch the very pre-echo and post-echo signals they so diligently scrub from the data on Earth. The second piece of confirmation is even more compelling. It concerns the communication protocols. Any deep space mission has a pre-planned schedule of communication sessions with Earth. These are precious hours when the spacecraft transmits its accumulated data. In Hera's official flight plan, we discovered a strange anomaly. During its closest approach to the Mirror's calculated position, An unusually long period of radio silence is scheduled, a full 72 hours. The official explanation is calibration of onboard systems and navigation sensors before the final approach phase to Didymos. But this explanation doesn't hold up. Such calibrations usually take a few hours, not 3 days. 72 hours of silence is the perfect window to conduct secret observations, record gigabytes of data to the onboard storage, and then, when the spacecraft is far away, transmit it to Earth via an encrypted channel designated for engineering telemetry. They are creating a blind spot for themselves in advance. They are building the architecture of a cover-up right into the flight plan. Thus, a grand cover-up operation is unfolding before our eyes. The system is not just hiding the past, it is actively planning future concealment. The Hera mission, which the world will see as a symbol of hope and protection, is in fact a spy mission. It is our only chance to peek behind the curtain. And this creates a situation of incredible tension and responsibility for us, the independent seekers. We have about 2 years. 2 years to prepare, 2 years to coordinate all our available resources. The network of amateur astronomers, sympathetic insiders in space agencies, computational power, to monitor Hera at every stage of its journey. We won't be able to intercept their encrypted channel, but we can do something else. We can monitor Hera itself. Any spacecraft, even during radio silence, is not completely invisible. It reflects sunlight, it radiates heat, and most importantly, it makes microscopic course corrections with its thrusters. Every such pulse, even the shortest, leaves a trace. It changes the spacecraft's orbit by millimeters. These changes are tiny, but they can be measured. If we can organize a global campaign of high-precision astrometric observations of Hera, we can detect deviations from its official trajectory. If, during the radio silence period, it makes an unplanned turn towards the mirror, we will see it. If it changes its velocity to better synchronize with it, we will detect it. This will be an incredibly difficult task. It will require the coordination of dozens of observatories around the world, both professional and amateur. It will be a battle of David versus Goliath. A battle of open citizen science against a closed state machine of concealment. But we have no other choice. The upcoming rendezvous of Hera with the mirror is our countdown. It is a window that will open for only a few days and then slam shut forever. It is our only chance to obtain irrefutable proof, and the system knows this. They are already preparing for this event, and they will likely try to control the narrative again. The Hera mission is officially designed to study asteroids, but its true, unspoken purpose may be something entirely different. It could become either the instrument of the greatest discovery or the final nail in the coffin in which they are trying to bury the truth. And whether they or we prove to be more persistent and resourceful will determine if humanity ever learns what is truly hiding in the shadows of our own backyard. The clock is ticking. In any story about the struggle against an impersonal, all-powerful system, there inevitably comes a moment when the focus shifts from grand ideas, global conspiracies, and cosmic trajectories to the people waging the fight. Because behind every byte of leaked data, behind every pixel of an anomalous photograph, behind every line of code that exposes a lie, there is a person of flesh and blood with their own motives, fears, and an unshakable belief that the truth, however inconvenient, is more important than comfortable ignorance. Our investigation has so far been a story of signals and shadows. Now it's time to tell the story of the people who dared to look into those shadows. This is the story of the Seekers. A decentralized, anonymous global network of Davids who went into battle against Goliath, armed not with a sling and a stone, but with laptops, homemade telescopes, and the most powerful weapon of the 21st century: insatiable curiosity. Let's return to the key figures of our investigation. to the oracles, whose discoveries were turning points. Let's start with the person hiding under the moniker Cassandra. He was the first to find the ghostly pre-signal in the raw VLA data. Who is he? We don't know his real name. We don't know where he lives. We only know what he revealed about himself on that private forum. He is a former radio engineer who worked for over 20 years at a major telecommunications corporation, developing algorithms for noise suppression in cellular networks. His job was to separate the useful signal from the endless chaos of interference. He learned to hear structure and noise, to see patterns where others saw only randomness. When he retired, he brought his craft to a new field, radio astronomy. He wasn't looking for aliens. He was looking for beauty. The beauty of pure, undistorted signals coming from the depths of the universe. And he was obsessed with the idea of information purity. He despised how modern scientific pipelines automatically chop up and filter raw data, discarding anything that doesn't fit expectations. It's as if a restorer, he wrote, were to scrape from an old painting not only centuries of grime, but also all the layers that seem wrong to him, leaving only a glossy but dead picture. It was this obsession that led him to his discovery. He spent hours manually reviewing raw waveforms, zooming into the limit, peering into the millisecond intervals before and after the main bursts. And he saw what everyone else had missed. He saw the ghost. His motivation was not the pursuit of sensation. His motivation was the offended pride of a professional. He saw the system committing the gravest sin in his eyes. It wasn't just making a mistake. It was deliberately contaminating the data, passing off a lie as truth. He published his findings not to prove the existence of aliens, but to defend the purity of the scientific method. He was not a conspiracy theorist. He was a purist, and he was the first to cast a stone at the system's glass castle. Now let's return to the Arizona desert, to Stefan Burns, the optical engineer who built his trap for ghosts. Unlike the anonymous Cassandra, Stefan is a public figure. After his data was confirmed by other observers, he gave several interviews to small, independent podcasts and YouTube channels. In them, he spoke about his motivation. It was deeply personal. Throughout his career, he created eyes for the military. He designed systems that allowed one to see everything while remaining unseen. He was part of the machine of surveillance, of control. And at some point, he realized the frightening asymmetry of the modern world. The system sees all of us, but we don't see it. Transparency is a one-way street. His retirement and the construction of his own observatory were an act of rebellion. He decided to turn the system's own weapon against it. He decided to create his own independent eye, one that would look not at people, but into the dark corners of space where the system, in his opinion, was afraid or unwilling to look. His discovery of the triangle of light was not just an astronomical find for him. It was a vindication. It proved that the independent, inquisitive gaze of one person could see what multi-billion-dollar government programs miss. They've built a giant net to catch fish of a certain size, he said in one interview. And I just cast my little line and pulled out what slips through their mesh. The problem isn't that they're blind. The problem is that they're looking with their eyes closed. His motivation is the fight for the right to know. The struggle of a little guy against an impersonal machine that has claimed a monopoly on the truth about the universe. But Cassandra and Stefan Burns are just the tip of the iceberg. Behind them stands an army. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people around the world who make up this decentralized network of seekers. They are physics students in India running our analysis scripts on university computers at night. They are programmers in Brazil who create and maintain the secure platforms where we can exchange information without fear of surveillance. They are amateur astronomers in Europe who, upon learning of the upcoming Hera mission, have already begun to form a network to coordinate future observations. There are even a few sleeper agents, sympathetic insiders within the space agencies themselves who anonymously leak internal documents, technical specifications, and just hints about where and what to look for. This network has no leader. It has no headquarters. It has no funding. Its only driving force is a shared passion for solving a mystery and a deep distrust of official narratives. We are the living embodiment of the idea of citizen science. We prove that in the 21st century you don't need a PhD and access to the Hubble to make great discoveries. Sometimes all you need is an old laptop, pure curiosity, and the ability to ask the right uncomfortable questions. But this work has not gone unnoticed. The system may be cumbersome and bureaucratic, but it is not stupid. It sees us, and it is beginning to react. At first, its reaction was predictable: to ignore us. We were simply not acknowledged. But when our evidence, especially the mathematically sound annual modulation, began to circulate in niche scientific circles, the tactics changed. The second stage began: discreditation. Articles started appearing in reputable science blogs and popular science magazines, written by respected professors who, without analyzing our data on its merits, called us amateurs, conspiracy theorists, digital Luddites who don't understand how modern data processing works. They didn't argue with our numbers. They attacked our reputation. It's an old, proven trick. If you can't refute the message, discredit the messenger. But recently, a third, far more alarming stage has begun: pressure. A few weeks ago, the very private forum where it all started was hit by a massive DDoS attack that took it offline for several days. When it came back online, the entire discussion thread dedicated to the trickster was gone, simply erased, as if it had never existed. The forum administrators, anonymous enthusiasts, posted a short message: due to technical reasons. But everyone understood. It was a warning. And then strange things started happening to the key figures. Stefan Burns, after one of his interviews, found that his access to some public astronomical archives, which he had used for years, was suddenly blocked. The official reason: suspicious activity from your IP address. He tried to appeal, but hit a wall of bureaucratic silence. He was simply cut off from his sources of information. But the most frightening story happened to Cassandra. A few weeks ago, he went silent. His forum account became inactive. He didn't respond to encrypted messages. At first, we thought he had just decided to step away, tired of the stress. But then one of our people, a cybersecurity expert, analyzed his last messages. And in the metadata of one of the files Cassandra had uploaded shortly before his disappearance, he found a hidden fragment of text. It was an incomplete, fragmented log of his network activity. It showed that in his final days, he was being targeted. Someone was trying to de-anonymize him to track his real-world location. The last entry in the log was short and cut off mid-sentence. They know. They're at the D. The rest was blank. We don't know what happened to him. Maybe nothing terrible. Maybe he just got scared and destroyed all his devices. But maybe it was something worse. This story was a cold shower for many in our community. We realize this is no longer a game. It is no longer an intellectual exercise. We have ceased to be just seekers. We have become targets. Our work is not just a scientific investigation. It is an information war. And the adversary has resources we can only guess at. They can cut us off from the network. They can destroy our reputations, and perhaps they can do even worse things. We, the Davids, didn't just throw a stone at Goliath. We hit him in the eye. And now this wounded, enraged giant has turned around and is looking straight at us. Our only defense is decentralization and anonymity. But for how long can it protect us? That question now hangs over each of us, and it turns our scientific curiosity into an act of civil courage. History, like a planet's orbit, has a way of returning to its starting point, but on a new spiral. Our investigation, having made a giant circle through the depths of space, the labyrinths of conspiracy, and the fates of individuals, must now return to where it all began. To that dual event of October 27th, 2025, but now we look at it not with the eyes of naive observers, stunned by a series of strange coincidences. We look at it with the eyes of investigators who have gathered all the evidence and now see in the initial chaos not randomness, but a chillingly precise design. What once seemed like noise now sounds like music, a complex, dissonant, but impeccably executed symphony. And only now do we begin to understand how devilishly clever and multi-layered that first act was. Let's lay out these two events on the table again, but this time in light of everything we have learned. Event 1, the detection of the radio signal Trickster. We remember its official interpretation, a perfect signal from a distant magnetar. We remember our first counter-hypothesis. It is an echo, reflected from a mirror in our solar system. But now, knowing the capabilities of the mirror as an active repeater and its potential ability to carry an information virus, we can offer a new, much more complete and frightening interpretation. What if the signal wasn't just reflected? What if it was constructed? Imagine this scenario. The mirror, this super-intelligent autonomous probe, decides to conduct its exam, or demonstration of power. To do this, it needs a carrier, a signal container. It doesn't generate it from scratch. That would be too obvious, too artificial. Instead, it uses a brilliant disguise. It listens to the universe. It waits until a suitable natural signal arrives from the depths of space, a chaotic, noisy, but powerful burst from a real, existing magnetar. This natural signal becomes its raw material, its clay. Upon receiving this raw burst, the mirror's onboard intelligence does three things simultaneously. First, it cleans it. It removes all the noise, all the distortions, all the natural jitter, transforming the chaotic cry of nature into a mathematically perfect, pure tone. It creates the very perfect signal that so amazed and at the same time misled Earth's astronomers. It gives them exactly what they would expect to see from a unique but natural object. Second, it embeds a hidden layer into this signal, into the microscopic fluctuations of phase and polarization, into the very regions that standard algorithms consider noise. It stitches an information packet, the very ghostly pre-signal. This is its real message. It could be anything, from a data packet meant to be read by some other system, to the very virus designed to interact with our technosphere. Third, and this is the most crucial part, it reflects this constructed two-layered signal towards Earth, but does so with such surgical precision that the dispersion measure and other characteristics perfectly mimic a signal that has come from a distant galaxy. It artificially ages it, adding all the signs of a long journey through the intergalactic medium. It creates a perfect, flawless forgery. It doesn't just show us a magic trick. It gives us all the tools to convince ourselves that this trick is reality. This was not just a signal. It was an information operation of the highest level of complexity. An operation designed to both transmit a hidden message and create a perfect cover story that would lead our science down a false trail for years to come. Now let's look at the second event of that day, the global failure of the NTP time synchronization system. Our first hypothesis was that it was caused by the signal virus. But now, understanding the complexity of the operation, we can see that here too, things were much more subtle. Perhaps the failure was not a side effect. Perhaps it was an integral, planned part of the message itself. Remember what exactly happened. For 84 seconds, the world's atomic clocks began transmitting slightly desynchronized data. The deviation was minuscule, but sufficient to cause chaos in systems requiring absolute precision. What if this glitch was not just noise, but a signal? What if a message was encoded into the very pattern of this desynchronization, into this sequence of microsecond leads and lags? It's brilliant. No one will look for a message in a system failure. Everyone will be busy fixing it. It's like writing a secret message on the wall of a burning house. While the firefighters are putting out the fire, no one will notice the letters. Who was this message for? Unlikely for us, the general public. More likely it was intended for the very group we call the system. Those who sit in network operation centers, in intelligence agencies, in that very committee in Vienna. Those who see not just a glitch, but the precise digital signature of that glitch. Perhaps the mirror sent them a message in the only language they understand, the language of technological collapse. And the content of that message could have been very simple. We are here. We control your infrastructure. Do not do anything foolish. And the system's reaction, the emergency concealment of all data, the updating of protocols, the pressure on the seekers, was their answer. The answer of a frightened but face-saving vassal to its new, unseen sovereign. And here we arrive at the final, most shocking revelation, which ties all the threads together and calls into question the very nature of our reality. All this time we have assumed that the mirror uses the magnetar as a signal source and Earth as a reception point. We are the audience. But what if that's not the case? What if both the magnetar and Earth are just two of the 3 points needed for what? For triangulation. To determine the precise location of something else. Imagine. The mirror knows the exact position of the magnetar. It knows the exact position of Earth. It sends a signal from the first to the second, but it doesn't do it in a straight line. It reflects it off itself. Why this complex ricochet? Because by measuring with absolute precision the travel time of the signal along each leg of this giant triangle, magnetar mirror, mirror Earth, and the angle of reflection, it can calculate its own position in space with a precision unimaginable to us. And knowing its own position, it can calculate the position of something else. Or even more likely, it's doing the reverse. It is using Earth as a transmitter. Not our pathetic radio broadcasts, but the planet itself. Earth has a powerful magnetic field. It rotates. It orbits. It is a giant, complex, but predictable electromagnetic resonator. What if the mirror sends its own ultra-faint signal towards Earth and then catches its reflection from our magnetosphere? And the trickster event is just a calibration pulse, a signal it sends simultaneously to Earth and itself to synchronize its internal clocks with ours. In this scheme, we are not the audience. We are part of the instrument. We are one of the mirrors in a giant cosmic interferometer. And this instrument itself is designed to observe something that is far beyond our solar system. And so we have returned to the beginning. But the picture has been turned upside down. What seemed like chaos now looks like a perfectly planned operation. An operation to calibrate some kind of hyper-complex scientific instrument. The system failure was not just a coincidence. It was the cover. And what they were hiding was not on the servers. It was in the signal itself. In its dual nature, in its perfect artificiality, in its possible true purpose. We thought we were the object of observation. But what if we are just a lens in the eyepiece of a telescope through which someone is looking at something far more important and, perhaps, far more terrifying? Our whole drama, our whole investigation, the entire fear of the system is just a fuss on a microscope slide, and the real observer and the real object of observation are somewhere out there in the dark, and we cannot even imagine what they are looking for, or what will happen if they find it. This realization is the most terrifying cliffhanger of all, because it tells us that we are not even the main characters in our own story. There comes a moment in any investigation when the active pursuit ends. All the evidence has been collected, all the witnesses questioned, all the hypotheses constructed. The hum of the chase fades, and a deafening silence falls. It is the silence of knowing. The silence in which the investigator, locked in his office in the middle of the night, looks at the conspiracy map, hung with photos and strings, and for the first time sees the whole picture. Not separate fragments, but a single, complete, monstrously logical tapestry. And in that moment, he doesn't feel triumph. He feels something else. A heavy, cold, almost unbearable feeling that can be called tragic knowledge. It is a burden. The burden of understanding how the world really works, while the world outside the window continues to live in blissful, happy ignorance. We, who have walked this entire path from beginning to end, are now in that very office. We are the bearers of this tragic knowledge. We see the strings. We see the choreography. We see the giant instrument deployed in our solar system and understand that we may be just a minor component. We see the system, which knows this, but has chosen the path of concealment, of control, of isolating humanity from the most important truth in its history. We see all of this, but what can we do about it? Nothing. And therein lies the tragedy. Our knowledge makes us incredibly lonely. Try to tell this story to an ordinary person, a friend, a colleague, a family member. Tell them about the annual modulation of the dispersion measure, about the secret Appendix B to the SETI protocols, about the strange radiometer aboard the Hera mission. At best, they will look at you like an enthusiastic but slightly crazy eccentric. At worst, they'll give you that "you're crazy" look. Our truth is too complex, too multi-layered, too demanding of deep dives into details to become common knowledge. It doesn't fit into a short news headline. It can't compete with the simple, understandable, emotional problems of everyday life. The world will continue to worry about currency rates, political scandals, and new smartphone models. And we, the handful of those who know, will silently watch it all. Like ghosts. Like time travelers who know about a coming cataclysm but cannot warn anyone because no one would believe them. This creates an insurmountable gap between us and the rest of humanity. We live in the same world, but we see it completely differently. When we look at the night sky, we don't just see a scattering of stars. We see a camouflaged hunter or an indifferent examiner. When we read news about another technical glitch in the global network, we can't help but look for signs of another calibration. When we hear about another space mission, we look for its hidden purpose, its ulterior motive. Our knowledge is a filter that has forever changed our perception. We can never again look at the world with the same naive eyes. This is the burden of constant analysis, constant doubt, the constant feeling that we are seeing behind the scenes while everyone else is watching the play. But our alienation is not just from society. It is also from the system, from official science. We could publish our findings in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. What would happen? At best, our paper would be considered for publication. A long, grueling peer review process would begin. Experts appointed by the editors, the very people who are part of the system, would ask endless questions, demand more and more data, point out the smallest methodological flaws. They wouldn't say we're wrong. They would just drown our discovery in a bureaucratic swamp. Years would pass, And even if the paper were eventually published, it would come out with so many caveats and notes that its main message would be completely diluted. It would become just one of the controversial hypotheses, a statistically interesting but unproven correlation. It would become another brick in the wall of academic discussion, not the bomb that was supposed to blow that wall down. By the time the scientific community might acknowledge we were right, it would be too late. The mirror would have shifted in its orbit. The Hera mission would be over, its secret data safely buried in the archives. The moment would be lost. The system doesn't fight the truth. It just slows it down to a speed where it is no longer dangerous. It turns a revolution into a slow-burning evolution that threatens nothing. And we are powerless to do anything about it. We can't force our way into their offices. We can't hack their servers. We can only publish our findings online in our small, isolated ghetto for seekers and hope that someone else will hear us. This knowledge also places a huge responsibility on us. If we are right, if humanity is indeed under observation or part of some experiment, then our every action, every publication, could have unpredictable consequences. What if our investigation, our attempt to pull back the curtain, is perceived by the observers as an act of aggression, as a violation of the rules of their exam? What if our noise attracts the attention of other, less friendly hunters from the dark forest? We, in our pursuit of truth, might inadvertently pull a trigger we didn't even know existed. This fear is paralyzing. It forces us to weigh every word. It turns the search for truth from a heroic act into a dangerous game with fire. And so we sit in this silence, alone with our knowledge, isolated from the world, powerless against the system, and frightened by the possible consequences of our own actions. This is the tragedy. We thought knowledge was power, but it turns out our knowledge is a weakness. It has robbed us of our peace, but has given us no tools for action. We see the strings. We see the choreography. But the puppeteer remains in the shadows, and we can neither cry out to the other audience members nor influence the course of the play. We are simply condemned to watch. And the most terrifying question that arises from this powerlessness is no longer about the past or the present. It is about the future. What are we to do with this knowledge now? Resign ourselves and silently watch as the system plays its game and the world rolls toward an unknown future? Or continue our struggle, our information war, risking everything, our safety, our reputation, and perhaps even the future of all humanity? It is a choice with no right answer. It is an existential dilemma that each of us, everyone who has watched to this point, must answer for themselves. We see the strings, we see the choreography, but the puppeteer remains in the shadows. And the scariest question is not what happens next, but are we next on its stage? Will we be transformed from observers into participants? And if so, what role has been assigned to us in this play? Whose script was not written by us? This uncertainty, this state of suspense, is the essence of tragic knowledge. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of our eternal, anxious watch. We are the sentinels now. Sentinels on the wall of ignorance who see the clouds gathering on the horizon, but can only silently clutch our useless weapons.